Well, good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us. We are humbled by the large number of people that have agreed to be peer reviewers. We're very much appreciative of this morning. If you would please mute your sound for now. We'll have plenty of time later for questions and comments. Several years ago, after the first volume of the best practice standards were developed, the Montana Office of the Court Administrator developed a contract with NPC Research to develop a peer review process to apply the new standards to our drug courts. With the help of NPC and the state of Idaho, we developed this process and we've been trying to improve upon it ever since. We're now about to embark on the second round of peer reviews. As a result, we have added not only additional adult drug courts that have joined us in the last 2 to 3 years, but we now have volume 2 of those standards. We also have a set of family drug court standards for the first time and a set of juvenile drug court standards. So this new round will include those categories of drug courts as well, family and juvenile, as well as all the adult drug courts. We are really indebted to NADCP, the National Association of Drug Court Professionals, for developing the standards. Doug Marlowe, who many of you have heard, he presented to all of us in November last year, brought all the researchers together at NADCP to develop the initial set of standards, and then Terrence Walton at NADCP has kind of picked up the effort, and he was also instrumental in the development of the family drug court standards. I also have to be on that, on the development, on the advisory group, develop the family drug court standards. So the standards are far superior to what we initially had, the 10 key components. The standards that we have now do fit within that framework of the 10 key components, but of course they are really strongly evidence-based and have a much better basis to them than the 10 key components originally had. I'm especially thankful to Juliet Mackin, who will join us shortly, for putting up with me and helping us develop the process tailored to the state of Montana and our Montana drug courts. Let me now introduce you to Beth Mclaughlin. For those of you that don't know Beth, she's the director of the Office of the Court Administrator. I've been working with Beth now for, gosh, it's over 12 years, I think, and have developed a great respect for her guidance and her capabilities. She's a very strong advocate for treatment courts and is responsible, I think, for the reputation and the resources that Montana treatment courts enjoy today. Beth, will you address this group, please?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. I'm just so pleased to see the number of folks that have volunteered to help out with the peer review process. I clearly understand that all of you have full-time and many of you more than full-time jobs just taking care of your day-to-day work. So agreeing to not only become trained in this process, but to join us in doing these peer reviews is greatly appreciated. When I've been with the judicial branch for 20 years now, and I remember very clearly the days when we didn't have general fund support for treatment courts, when there were questions about whether treatment courts were something that could actually work in Montana and something that we wanted to financially support and support generally as a criminal justice intervention and a family court intervention. We now, 20 years later, I think enjoy great support from a variety of partners across the both government and private sector. Part of the reason for that support is we're very serious about running good treatment courts that comply with evidence-based standards. And this peer review process is a key part of demonstrating to the folks that fund us and support us that we are very serious about having high quality treatment courts. We've explained this process to legislators, to other partners, and I think there's a good understanding and good support around our interest in evaluating these courts and having high performing courts. I also want to thank Juliet in particular for being here. She is a great champion of drug courts and, you know, frankly, a gifted researcher and trainer. So the time you're going to spend with her today is going to be well worth it, both professionally and personally. So again, on behalf of the judicial branch, thank you so much for giving up your time to become a peer reviewer, and thank you in the future to those of you who actually do the peer reviews. So Jeff, I'll turn it back to you.
Okay, thank you, Beth. Appreciate it. Beth mentioned Juliet. Let me introduce Juliet to you. I don't know if I can get Juliet on the screen. How do I do that?
Hey, everybody.
You can stop sharing, Jeff, and then she'll show up if she talks.
Okay. Can I stop sharing?
Hello.
So this is Juliet. Juliet is the co-president of NPC Research. The other president is Shannon Carey. Some of you, I'm sure, have heard Shannon Carey before. Juliet is also the director of quality and training and senior research associate. She's been involved with over 80 studies of treatment courts, including adult, DUI, juvenile, family, mental health, veterans, and tribal court programs. She's directed multi-year, multi-site statewide treatment court studies, as well as individual program evaluations, conducting technical assistance, training, process evaluations, longitudinal studies, cost-benefit research, using both qualitative and quantitative research methods. She was part of the evaluation team that recently conducted the national evaluation of the Juvenile Drug Treatment Court guidelines, working with 10 sites across the country. She helped develop the peer review model being used here in Montana, as well as supported several states in developing certification procedures. For those of you that don't know me, and there are a bunch of you that don't know me, I've been in the field for 53 years. I started when I was 8 years old. I've been the state alcohol and drug abuse director in Nebraska, Colorado, and Oregon over about 30 years. Was the drug court administrator for the city of St. Louis, where we had a family, juvenile, co-occurring, pre-plea, post-plea treatment dockets. And at any point in time, we had about 400 or more clients in our St. Louis drug court. So we'll get started with the presentation, and let's see if I can get back to our slide presentation. Kevin, I'm not moving forward.
Just click on the slide, Jeff, and then hit the arrow to the right.
Click on the slide.
Yeah, just click anywhere. There you go.
There we go. So the purpose for our peer review process has not changed over time. Our purpose is to move our drug courts in alignment with national best and evidence-based practices, and to create a learning community in Montana among our peer reviewers. After we began the development of the peer review process, the Secretary of State office here in Montana completed a performance audit of our drug courts, and one of their key recommendations was that Montana's Supreme Court implement nationally recognized standards for drug courts that require a comprehensive system of monitoring and evaluation of nationally recognized standards to ensure achievement of program goals and objectives and gauge program effectiveness. So our third purpose is to meet the auditor's recommendation. And again, this was a performance audit of our drug courts, and this interest in how we monitor and evaluate our drug courts, as Beth mentioned, has continued within the Montana Legislative Assembly. With a few standards, they are aspirational, especially for rural treatment courts. Judge Meyer, some of you know retired Judge Meyer, who's done a lot of presenting for NADCP, specifies that they are aspirational. And so we're seeking to establish a process to improve drug court program practices and increase accountability related to the implementation of these best practices. The benefit of using these standards and the resultant practices is that they have been demonstrated to improve participant outcomes, meaning they will reduce recidivism, increase graduation rates, and result in cost savings to justice and child welfare systems. Peer review is a modified process evaluation used by peers instead of professional evaluators. The focus is on positives and making improvements, not on sanctions, not on reducing findings or decertification. Some states have implemented certification processes and really are more punitive than what we do here in Montana. We want to be as constructive as we can and move our courts in the direction of meeting these standards. The peer review process is intended to be, again, less scary and to provide outside perspective and feedback while meeting people who can relate to the challenges that our drug courts face, meaning all of you. I believe all of our treatment courts want to be the best that they can be and identify areas for improvement and eventually improve rates of success as a result of this process. That was our experience during the first round when we had action plans and people took them seriously and improved their operations. As peers representing your drug court will be reviewed as well. So everyone is eventually in the same boat. The peer review process provides a low-cost way of applying these standards to our treatment courts, yet an efficient way for a rural state like Montana to make good progress in moving toward compliance with what we know works. At a minimum, we will try to match up peer reviewers to function within the same category of treatment court that they come from. In other words, we'll try to have family drug court coordinators and treatment team members doing a peer review of family drug courts and juvenile drug court team members doing juvenile drug courts, and of course the adults doing adults. Excuse me. I will review all the draft reports and monitor areas where there are weaknesses across the state and try to program training to provide assistance for improvement. Just to remind you, we do have a statewide conference scheduled for September 21 through 23 of this year in Bozeman. And I pray that we are able to carry it out. We have postponed it twice now as a result of the pandemic. So mark that down, September 21 through 23. And again, what we learned through the peer review process in the way of deficiencies and needed training, we will program at that conference as well as other locations and other venues. As I indicated earlier, our goal is to improve Montana drug court outcomes by moving our drug courts toward utilization of these evidence-based practices. Most of you receive no additional benefit for doing drug court. Most of you have full schedules, travel a lot, and so doing drug court is an additional workload with no extra remuneration or benefit other than having the satisfaction of knowing that you are doing the best that you can for the drug dependent in your treatment court. So we are not punitive in our process. We are very appreciative that people are willing to do the extra work. We will not withhold funds. We will not be punitive. We will be as constructive as we can be. However, we do require action plans with deadlines and assigned responsible people to carry out the action plans. This requirement is part of the final report that goes to the court being reviewed as we will discuss later. One last point, and it is an important point. In treatment court, we are dealing with a deadly disease called substance use dependency. It is incumbent upon all of us to take the process very seriously because the effectiveness of our efforts depends to a degree on how we monitor the fidelity to these standards. The implementation of these standards saves lives. We cannot afford to take this peer review process lightly. We must be honest, we must be direct, we must be forthright in our application of these standards. Our process with each local drug court starts approximately 60 days prior to the anticipated site review with a letter from me to the judge of the court being reviewed and to the coordinator announcing our intent to conduct a peer review visit. 2 days later, I'll send a second letter out to the local drug court coordinator requesting completion of the electronic survey, which has around 200 questions in it. It will be completed as well as a cover page with additional information for the site review team. And I will request that we receive all documents, manuals, releases of information, memorandums of understanding, etc., that the court has and uses. And then when I receive those materials, I will forward them to the site review team for their review. Approximately 30 days before the site review takes place, I will make sure that the online survey is completed and that NPC has done the crosswalk from the survey to a best practice table for the peer reviewers to use on site. The best practice table will indicate where there appears to be standards that are substantially met, partially met, or not met. That best practice table will be distributed to the site review team well before they go on site. At the same time, the peer review team will confirm the dates and reserve hotel rooms. All of these steps will be in the packet. We'll review them right here, but you'll also have them in the packet. The peer review team is selected at least 60 days prior to the site review and reviews the materials that we will go over in a few minutes. 30 days before the review, the team reviews the best practice table and develops areas for deeper review while they go on site. And focuses on the partial and the non-compliance areas. The team meets by phone to finalize plans and who is responsible for doing what when they go on site. I will try to be on those phone calls as well. The team will go on site, take notes, have an exit interview with the team before they leave, and try to make sure that there are no surprises later on when the draft report is submitted to the team being reviewed. Peer review team will draft the report within hopefully 2 weeks, send a draft to me or to whoever the statewide coordinator is, and we'll review the draft report for clarity and send it to the judge and the local coordinator in draft review form. The report will then be finalized and sent out with an action plan format to request completion of the action plan. My job then is to review the action plan, look at what assistance and training might be needed, and try to facilitate that to the local drug court team. Keep in mind that we've got over 40 drug courts now in Montana. Our intent is to do 1 a month. So we're talking about doing peer review over the next 3 years or so. Here is a brief summary of the activities that go on while the team is on site. And a team, when I say a team, I mean roughly 2 people that will be assigned to do a peer review. So the peer review team will do interviews with the treatment court team on an individual basis. If someone can't show up for an interview while the team is on site, an interview can be scheduled virtually either before or after the site review with that team member. We will observe the status hearing, observe the staffing while we're there. A focus group with the drug court participants will be set up by the local coordinator, and the review team will conduct that focus group. And the team will then meet for an hour or so to discuss what they have found in the way of strengths and weaknesses in preparation for the exit interview. And hopefully the exit interview will be with the drug court team, but at least with the judge and with the coordinator. And there are formats that we will talk about shortly and directions for all of these activities in the manual that you'll be provided electronically. And Juliet's going to go through all of those shortly. Keep in mind that these reports that you're going to develop in draft form that I will review, that will be approved basically by the judge and the coordinator of the local report, when they are finalized, are in the public domain, and anyone who wants a copy will be provided a copy of them because they are paid for with taxpayer dollars. Next, I think I've asked 3 people who were helped in the conducting of the first round of our peer reviews to say a few things about their experience, any concerns that they had initially or while they were on site, what went well, and what they got out of the process. So I'm going to ask Shelly Thompson if she will join us next and talk about her experience. Shelly, are you there?
I am. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, hear you good.
So for me, I ended up, I think I participated in 2, maybe 3 peer reviews. The experience in general was a good experience. I was a little worried going in because I know, when you work hard and you're proud of your own program, it's always a little challenging, the idea of going into somebody else's program and maybe having to define some deficiencies and things like that. So I think one of the things that helped me going in was to realize that I'm not an auditor, that we were basically having an exchange of ideas and, just like you would in motivational interviewing, remember to, reaffirm those things they're really doing well. The other thing that I realized is each of these courts, each of these programs has something to offer. I know that I left Great Falls with some ideas about how to do our sanction and incentive programming. And I thought it was interesting there as well, where the judge had participants sitting. So little things you can pick up on with each of these programs. And I feel like the teams that were hosting us really appreciated the process and just appreciated the fact that somebody was looking at their program and making some suggestions. So that was kind of my experience. I also really enjoyed when we interviewed the participants, because that gives you such an interesting perspective on the program. And what I thought might be more negative was actually quite positive from the participants. I know when Mona used to do the surveys for us, I don't know why, but it surprised me when participants were, for the most part, very positive about the program. And I found that when we interviewed folks too. So anyway, I think it's a process people can enjoy. Again, I wouldn't go in there, acting like an auditor and clicking off the boxes. I would have a much more sort of casual approach. So that's what I've got, Jeff.
Thank you, Shelly. I agree with you. I think the focus groups with the participants gets to be kind of a highlight of the process. You learn a lot from the participants as well as from the drug court team members. So I do want to emphasize that when you are on site and you run into something that might be of interest to everybody else to help benefit their program, if you will identify those as strengths in your report, we will send those around to people. I remember in the 12th Judicial District up with Paul Nugent up there, they were doing those goodbye letters. And at the time, that was a novel thing to do. And we let everybody know that that's something they might want to consider. But so when you run into those kinds of things that you think might be helpful to everybody else in the field, if you'll identify those, we'll try to get those out to everybody. Next, I'd like to ask Hannah Alden if she would make a few comments about her experience.
Well, Jeff, I am really looking forward to having some of the experiences that Shelly got to have next time, because the one that I went and did with you was very different. First off, I actually learned so much from this training last time that I was able to bring back to my own court and make sure that we were on track and utilizing best practices kind of to the best of our ability and with the resources we had. So that was really helpful. And then I think the important things that I learned was you just don't know what you don't know. And so when you go and review a court, it's important to not be shy with those courts if they're really missing the marks of best practices, because, as we know from data, if a court is not functionally, utilizing all the best practices, it really can be harmful to participants. And these are folks who really need the best supportive services around them that we can possibly have. And so I guess We learned deficiencies of the state. I think through the peer review process last time, we learned the need for like a case management system. And that was something that came about. Now we all have access to DIMS. And that was really apparent kind of in the peer review that Jeff and I did. It was clear just sitting in the team meeting that it wasn't a functional court. There was no record of what sanctions had been done. There was no communication. No one was even clear if someone had showed up for a UA or if they'd completed their sanctions. And so, I think when you go in and do this peer review, you follow your gut instincts. If something doesn't really look like it's highly functional and good communication is happening, they need to know that because again, you're not recognizing something that you don't know if someone isn't bringing it to your attention. I don't get to say very nice things about Jeff all the time, but I was so appreciative of doing that peer review with him because we actually had to have some really difficult conversations that I would not have been prepared to have without Jeff. So just, FYI, some of you might be in a situation where you peer review someone that it's, they're really not a functional court and they'll grow from that experience.
Okay, thank you, Hannah, I think. Mona, are you on?
I have
Okay.
not seen Mona.
All right, maybe we'll catch up with her later. So let's move on. And I'm gonna ask Juliet to take over from here for a while, if I can figure out how to do that. Let's see, where are we?
Next one.
Next one?
Yeah, there we go. That's right. Thanks. Thanks, Jeff. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for being here and for having me. This part of the morning, we want to talk a little bit about the training packet. And as Jeff mentioned, you'll be provided with a lot of different materials to make sure that you have a step-by-step guidance for all of the different parts to the peer review process. So this part of the presentation is to share what the packet looks like, and so you can anticipate when you get it. And there are several different formats that you'll receive. And I believe that Jeff and Kevin will be putting all the materials on the website so that it'll be easy to access. This first document we call the table of contents, and it's really just a summary list of all the different materials. So we have one packet that has everything, and it's made up of a lot of different individual documents that walk through the process and provide support for each of the activities. And so this list has about 30 different items on it that are all part of the full packet. The table of contents has a little bit of color coding because some of our peer reviewers felt that there were so many documents that it could get a little bit confusing. So the documents, what you can see on the screen is that there is a code for purple, green, and orange. And that's just to kind of give a sense of when in this process do you need these materials so that you can focus, because we know it's a lot and we know you're doing it on top of your other work. So the purple documents are things we want to make sure, in addition to this session today, that you get a chance to read and review before you go on a visit. So these are all of the preparatory materials, the background, the explanations, the materials that help you get set up for the visit. So they include things around the summary checklist and task details about how do you go through this process, and it walks you through the entire thing, information about scheduling. And so we want to make sure that you have all of those materials. Then the green documents are the packet that you bring with you. So in addition to looking at them in advance, we do want to make sure that you have certain materials on hand. So for example, as Jeff mentioned, each program that's being reviewed will complete an online assessment. So you, as the reviewers, will receive a copy of the summary, the full assessment that they filled out, as well as that summary table of all the best practices and how well they've met those so far. So as he said, they'll either have met them or not, or there are some of the standards that are about whether they're fully, partially, or not yet met. So you'll get that summary so you know those areas that the program is already achieving and where they might need some support. And then there are a set of forms that we want you to know about, but you really don't need them until after you finish up the visit. So the pieces related to coming up with the summary report and making sure that you have all of the guidance that you might need to kind of wrap that piece up and make sure that you can finish up the peer review process after the visit. So those are the three kind of areas that are covered in this list, the table of contents. Oh, and I guess I should say, I know we've provided a lot of background material so far. Are there questions? Feel free to take a minute and let's see if anyone has questions so far.
A good time to stop and see if we've got questions so far. Anybody have a question?
There's nothing in the chat.
I looked in the chat, didn't see anything.
Okay.
We've got 52 people on board right now. There must be a question or two about what we've covered so far. Anybody?
Are we gonna get a copy of this packet? When are we gonna get that? So we can go over it.
You will get a copy of the entire packet sent to you electronically. Juliet, are you close to being done with the color coding, and when do you have it?
Yep. So we have a version that actually has there's a PDF document that has all these materials in it. And one thing we were adding was a tabbing system so that in the PDF document, you could actually click on each of these documents and go to the one that you wanted. So that should be ready today. So we'll get those out to you today. And then there will be several versions of forms that are actually in Word, because you can use them if you'd like to fill in material. So for example, when we get to the part about the summary report, it's actually a Word template. So then you can fill in the name of the program, the recommendations that you have, any feedback that the participants gave in different sections of the report, and we'll walk through it. But so those supplemental documents will be in Word. And then even though they're also in the training packet. And then there will be a separate packet that is just of these green materials. So just so that in case you just want to take the ones that you need for the visit, you'll have those with you. You can take those separately. So there are a couple of different versions, but yes, those will be available today.
Okay, so we'll have those out. We'll have those out to you by next week.
Okay. Super.
Okay.
Jeff, I have a question.
We'll also, Kevin will also put them on the website. Go ahead, somebody else.
I have a question. So when are you looking at starting the peer reviews, and when would we know what court we're assigned?
I was going to get to that in a minute.
Okay.
But let me just answer you right now. We're going to start with 3 courts that were in the statewide grant award 2 years ago, because in that grant award, NPC was designated to do peer review on those 3 courts. And those 3 courts are Lincoln County, which is the 19th Judicial District, Livingston, which is the 6th Judicial District, and the Adult Drug Court in Missoula, Judge Halligan's court, Jake's court. So the first 3 courts that we will do probably in April and May will be those 3 courts. Juliet will be in Montana leading those 3 reviews. And so it will be a good training ground for anybody that will be able to do additional peer reviews in the next 2 to 3 years. If you're interested in being a reviewer, let me know. Otherwise, I'll just check with people and make assignments. But those will be the first 3. And then after that, we'll be doing one a month. I do have a master calendar in draft. And I will start getting that out and assigning people probably next week. Beth has reviewed it. I need for Juliet to look at it, and then we'll get it out to everybody. It goes out for 3 years. And there are bound to be some changes that will occur, but it is a master calendar, and I will get that out to everybody. Does that answer that question?
Yes, it did.
I have a question, Jeff.
Oh, go ahead.
This is Dean Great Falls. Since
Yeah.
it is 3 years out, and you can anticipate changes with personnel and things like that, will this whole training be online or accessible so that if there is a change in the team or a participant, that they can go in and review this training to get up to snuff?
This training is being recorded, and it will be placed on the Montana Drug Court website.
Okay.
Is that
Thank
what
you.
you're asking?
Yes, yes. And I mean, 3 years down the road,
Yeah,
yeah,
right.
all kinds of things can happen. So, yeah.
And they will. Yeah, we are recording it.
Oh, good. I just wanted to know if we can always go back to refresh or to pick up things that we may have missed during this initial training, or for anyone who may come on, if someone else leaves, we can just direct them to this training, who's a part of our team.
Yes,
Thank you.
yes.
And
Other
Jeff and I are
questions?
available for questions too as we go, especially for refreshers and for helping with the actual implementation. So I'm happy to do that too.
Great. I just wonder, do we want to take a 10-minute break right here, Juliet, before you go on?
Sure,
Is it a good spot to do that?
sure. Yep, unless you want to do the roles piece and then, would you want to come back and do that one? We could start with we can dive into the documents once we take the break.
Yeah, why don't we do that? Let's take a
Okay,
10.
that sounds great.
And my watch is fast. I don't know what time it is. And there's no,
8:47.
but it's about 12 minutes to 9. Am I right?
Yep.
Okay, why don't we come back at 9 o'clock? We'll pick up from there. Thank you, everybody.
Jeff, I think it's going good.
Yeah,
And I was looking, it looks like we can go on Zoom and download the list too.
oh, okay.
I think, well, I'll have to look and see for sure, but I'll have to do it afterwards because I don't want to mess anything up.
Okay.
And then I'm going to have to run in about a half hour.
Yeah,
But I think you're fine. There's nothing I don't think you need. The only thing I would recommend you doing is just kind of monitoring the
Chat.
participant list in the chat box,
Oh.
the participant list in the chat box. Because people have been going out and coming in, not too much anymore. I mean, but other than that, I think it's going good.
when somebody needs to be admitted, it does show up. So I
Yeah,
can,
it shows up at the top. You can just say admit,
yeah,
and that should be fine. Yeah. And
Okay.
between you and Juliet, I think you're fine. But I'll try to stick on as long as I can here. It's
oh, that's
interesting.
all right. I think we're in good shape.
Okay. All right.
Thank-
Yeah, I'll talk to you later.
All right,
Okay, bye. I'll stay on for a while.
okay.
Hey, Jeff, I want to peer review Shelly's.
You want to peer review Shelley? Or
Yeah,
just-
basically. I just want you to pay for a hotel for me to go over and observe her awesome court.
Oh, we can work that out.
Hey, Jeff, I was thinking I could have joined Luan today. I am in Miles City, you know.
That's good.
Yeah,
Is Luan on?
she is. I don't know.
Did, Mona ever get on?
Nope, never did see Mona.
Okay.
Did you like that I said something nice about you, Jeff? I never do that.
It's the first time anybody's ever done that.
Hey, I gotta say, this is
That's
being
true.
recorded, okay? So let's be nice.
I want the
Keep it
transcript.
nice.
Uh-oh, I've done it now.
But
What's going on, Jeff?
I was gonna just show everybody the volume 1, volume 2, and the Family Drug Court Standards booklet. and how to access it is, what do I need to do here?
Just click on share screen.
I don't want to go back to that. I don't want to go back to the PowerPoint yet.
Okay. Did you open up that, those 2 volumes somewhere?
No, I've got them in my hand. I want the screen. I want me on the screen.
You are on the screen.
I am?
Yeah.
Okay. I can't see it in mine, but
Right. You don't see yourself.
okay.
That could be a good thing.
Yeah. Thanks, Kevin. Don't you have a hockey game to go to or something?
I do.
Hey Jeff, it's Bridget Beach.
Yeah.
Mona is with a client, so she won't be able to make the meeting today.
Okay.
I did go ahead and type up the list of who's in the participants, but Kevin, if you can actually download it, that's fine too. I was just trying to make sure we had a list of attendees.
Well, sometimes what you read on the internet doesn't always work like they say it does. So it could be the people that register only, which this one they didn't do. So I'm not 100% sure I can do it yet, but I was going to wait until after
Okay.
so I don't mess anything up here.
That makes sense.
You know, Jeff and Kevin, is it possible to send that link to where we can access this training so I can send it to the participant who wasn't able to be here today?
Well, yeah, well, we will get, are you talking about this recording?
Yes, please, because I am not computer savvy. And so it would just be easier for me if there's a link to just send to him so that he can access the training. If that's cool.
Yes, we can do that. Yes, we can do that.
Oh, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
I probably won't have it up until next week sometime.
That's okay.
Okay. I'll
Thank
just
you.
forward you the link and then you can forward it to whoever you want.
Thank you so much, Kevin. I appreciate that.
You bet.
And can I please get a copy of it too for our judge who's going to be sitting on this team too? She just had a trial this morning.
Yeah, no problem.
Thank you.
I just need to get the list. I don't know who everybody is, but we'll figure it out. Actually, before they get started, if anybody wants that link, if you want to just email me, my email is pretty easy to remember. It's kcook@mt.gov. So it's KCOOK@mt.gov. Just send me a link. Just send me a message saying you want the link and I'll send it to you.
What do we got, about a minute or two?
Yep, I have 2 minutes.
Hi, this is Luana in Miles City. How come I feel anxiety over this peer review?
It's have anxiety.
Huh?
It's good to have anxiety.
I feel like I have fear and I need to run. That's not the good anxiety.
Oh, I hope that by the end of the session, you'll feel a little more like you understand what to expect. But I think that we do hear from peers that until they actually go on the visit, the anticipation is a little scary because you don't know what it's going to feel like. But then once you do it, you realize you have all the information and skills that you need. But please let us know if there are places that you feel like you're not clear on something or there's more information or support we could provide.
I think I was okay until I heard Hannah. Hannah scared me.
Oh,
Oh, no. That was actually an emergency peer review, and it was not a regular, joyful, just skill review peer review.
I'm scared.
He should not have actually asked me. That was really not a regular peer review to talk.
I really like the fact that the other lady who spoke about it said that it was an exchange of ideas, because that makes the whole thing less intimidating, that you are exchanging what you're doing currently with your program. You're getting data from them, and there is that exchange that's a learning experience for both parties.
Yes.
Yeah, when, the first time that we got peer reviewed, I kept bringing up that we just needed some sort of case management system. And because during that peer review process, multiple courts had said that, that's kind of how DIMS came about. And so we as courts that's our opportunity to exchange information, to exchange shortcomings, to exchange needs, and then letting Jeff know, because he's our big advocate in getting more resources if he if he can.
And I am a newbie being a coordinator. I mean, I'm 2 years in, but when I came on, there was no manual. It's like having a kiddo, they come out and there's no manual, and you have to go through the quagmire yourself. I had other like JPOs and financial specialist folks who helped me along with my judge, but learning the job and knowing what I's to dot and T's to cross to do it effectively, I'm still in that learning and gleaming process. So having this for me is going to open up how I can improve our court by knowing what the best practices standards are and build from that foundation on site with our court.
Exactly. That was really what I felt like was the big benefit to me, is I just brought everything that I learned back to my court to make it better.
Well, I have to say something. I had a peer review done when I was a new coordinator, and it was a total stress for me because I didn't even know half the stuff, but it turned out to be amazing. It was Shelly Thompson and Steve Eddy did it. I'm going on my 7th year, and it was super cool because not only did I take Shelly into as a mentor, I learned so much from it. So even being new, having to do it was worth it for my court.
Let's get started again.
All right. Jeff, before you go, we had a question in the chat about the focus groups and how many participants are needed. So I don't know if you want to address that. Would you like me to?
I'm having a little trouble hearing you, Juliet.
Oh dear. Okay. Can you hear me better now?
Yeah.
Okay. We had a question in the chat about participants, how many participants are needed for the focus groups. And I thought I would just mention that that's pretty flexible. I mean, the intention, as you've heard, is to hear the voice of the participants because they have a unique perspective on the program, and they can also provide insight about what really supports them and where they feel there are barriers that are needed to be addressed. So we typically recommend 6 to 12 as kind of a group size, but we realize that varies a lot depending on the program size and what's feasible and the scheduling opportunities that you have. So I don't know, Jeff, if you have any particular guidance, but we have definitely, we just did some peer reviews in some other states with juvenile programs, and those programs were so small that we only got a few people, youth and parents in separate groups. So those, I think it really just depends on what you can access.
Yeah, usually those focus groups either occur before the docket on the day of the status hearing or directly after. And so if you can schedule it with the local coordinator to be either before or after the docket, you'll get a pretty good turnout, of participants. And I don't know, usually we had, between 5 and 12, I guess. And of course you take what you can get, but I can't remember doing a focus group where we didn't learn something from somebody that was very helpful in the review process. The other thing, Juliet, we might talk about while we're talking about participant focus groups is I think it's better if the people that are in, and by the way, there is a preamble that gets read to the participants to put them at ease about confidentiality and that they don't have to be concerned about anything that they say in the group. And that's why I think it's better if the focus group includes only the 2 peer reviewers and does not include any of the team or the coordinator from the local drug court, so that the participants can feel free to make whatever comments they want to make. You want to say anything about that, Juliet?
Yes, absolutely. That's the guidance that we provide as well. So we really do want a place for participants to be able to share freely, not feel as though their comments will be construed or affect their participation or their relationships with any of the team members. So, and when we provide the summary, so as peer reviewers, as you summarize the feedback that you receive, we provide that guidance also, not to indicate who said what. That's true for any of the interviews with team members as well, but with the participant focus group, making sure that the summary feedback is aggregated so that it doesn't individualize or identify any particular participant, but at least provides that kind of feedback in a summary way, so that they feel comfortable and that you get good information.
I have a question.
Sorry?
Does the focus group participants are just the current, or do you do current and previous participants to get that feedback as well?
That's a great question. Typically, it depends on what the timeline looks like and what the availability is of people. Usually we have current people, current participants, mostly because they're the easiest to access. And if Jeff said, if they're coming into court or leaving court, or sometimes there are programs that say, in lieu of our skill building group this week, we're going to offer an opportunity to do this focus group. So people, you've got a group of people. Typically it's current, but we've definitely had situations where there were past participants that were available either for an interview or for a group, or who were providing peer support services now or mentoring other participants. So there may be some opportunities for those folks. Typically, we try to encourage the participant focus group to have people who are both newer and more experienced in the program. So even if you don't get the people who have completed, that you might get someone who's in the later phases, so they can look back a bit and see, gee, we know this was hard when we started, but here's what the benefits have been to me. So it is nice to get a variety of people in different phases, or at least to have a few people that have had a little bit of experience so that they can reflect on what they've gone through. I think that will depend a little bit on each program, and you can talk to the coordinator about what makes sense.
Any other questions about participant focus groups? Okay, I don't know if it's hard for me to tell whether the camera is on me or not, but I wanted to make it clear to people that this is a copy of volume 1 of the best practice standards for adults. This is volume 2. You can access these by Googling adult treatment court best practice standards. Both volumes will come up when you Google it. This is a copy of the newer family treatment court best practice standards. And you can also access those by Googling family drug court best practice standards. I think they're all of them are on NADCP's website. Juliet, can you talk about how to access the juvenile drug court standards?
Yes, so if you do a Google search or an internet search on Juvenile Drug Treatment Court best practice standards or guidelines, sorry, they call them guidelines. So JDTC guidelines, that will pop up also. They are located on OJJDP, so Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention's website. But yes, you can search on the JDTC guidelines for
Did
those,
you
or
say-
let me know and I can email them to you.
That they are also on the NADCP website?
Those are not, they're not on NADCPs, they're just on OJJDPs.
Okay,
So the federal website.
Yeah.
Yeah, and those are actually going to be updated again soon, but there is a version from there. The primary release, which was in 2016, is still online.
okay. All right, let's move along. We thought it would be helpful to delineate roles a little bit here. And so just to help clarify further, what we've done is put a slide up here that shows what my responsibilities will be. We'll try and designate a lead reviewer, and then we'll talk about the other reviewer responsibilities. So again, I will recruit peer reviewers, maintain a pool of reviewers. We'll have the training be accessible for all the peer reviewers and any new peer reviewers. Maintain a list of programs that have been reviewed, have requested a review, or need a review to be done. That'll be the master calendar, basically. And I'll have a copy of that and have it, we'll try and post it on the website as well. Reach out to peer reviewers to request participation in peer reviews and connect them with the specific program and the local drug court coordinator. We do have a directory of Montana drug court treatment programs that lists both the coordinator and the judge. If anybody would like a copy of it, I try to keep it updated. I will communicate with the lead and the co-reviewers to ensure that the process is progressing. Provide support and answer questions that peer reviewers and programs have, including input on prioritizing recommendations or wording of recommendations. I will edit reports, track action plan process from the program being reviewed, link programs and peer reviewers so training and technical assistance resources are available, and complete recommendations from various reviews and identify themes and training that we will need to provide across the state. I don't know, how do I go to the next slide here, or let's see.
Yes. Unless you, did you want to talk about any distinction around the lead reviewer and the?
Yeah, but I was trying to get the slide up, or.
Do you want me to, I can share the training packet if you want.
Can you put the peer reviewer, the lead reviewer information up there?
Yes. Let me do that.
So I don't know if you can get it up there or not, but
Yes. Can you see that?
yeah.
Okay.
Oh, so the lead reviewer will, again, there's two reviewers will make up the site review team in most cases. We may add a third for larger courts or courts where the team is the same for both. For example, Judge Nisley's court has a DUI court and a vet court. We'll probably do those in the same review because it's the same drug court team. The dockets are different, but the team is the same. And so we may add a third reviewer to that review because of the number of courts and the size of the court. But anyway, I'll try to designate a lead reviewer who will be the primary communicator with the local site. That person will manage the steps and the timelines and make sure that everything's progressing. And if they have any problems, they can certainly get a hold of me. Maintain communication with me, facilitate any discussion of roles and who's going to do what on the team when they get on site. I don't need to go through all of this. You can read it. But we will try and designate both a lead reviewer and a co-reviewer. And the co-reviewer will basically do the same thing that the lead reviewer does, except the lead reviewer is going to take on some more responsibility to make sure that everything gets done according to the guidelines that that we will provide to everybody. So I just to let you know, there will be a lead reviewer and a co-reviewer designated on the team. Okay. Thanks, Juliet.
Sure. Do you want to go back to the slides or did you want me to show the next document? I think we're just going to go through the process overview document.
Go ahead. You want to go back to?
Oh, yeah, this was, I think, just, we wanted to just mention this piece, and I think that was going to be you if you wanted to, or I can do it. Would you like to go back
Is
to?
there anything new in there I need to talk about?
I think we just wanted to mention that this, as part of the packet.
Yeah,
there's
there
this-
is an overview.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a brief overview that helps provide that context, particularly if you're sharing information with anyone who might become interested in being a peer reviewer or is wondering what you're doing as a peer reviewer, or to help provide to the program that's being reviewed. So if you're a program and you're getting reviewed, you can help share this with your team and other partners so that they understand what's happening or why it's being implemented and how it will work. So it's a brief document just to explain the purpose and the overview of the process.
Yeah, if I was a lead reviewer, I would take this document, give it to the local drug court coordinator so that he or she could share it with the team members and they would understand what is going to happen as far as a peer review for their local drug court.
All right, do you want to go back to the slides, Jeff, or should I?
Yeah. You want me to, let's see.
In reading your slide, I had a brief question. It said that the reviews are 2 to 3 years. What determines if your program is going to be reviewed in a 2 or 3 year timeline?
I do.
Oh, okay.
Where we think there is a team that needs to be reviewed sooner, or it's a newer team, we'll probably move them ahead. Are you waiting on
And
me,
Jeff,
Julie?
you were saying earlier too, that if a program has gone through changes or is having challenges and makes a request to be reviewed, they might also get bumped a little earlier too, right?
Right.
So.
I'm not able to move forward here.
There we go. That looks, oh, yeah, if you could go back one slide, I'll just do the quick checklist. So, so what you'll see now is these documents are all labeled A through, I think we have up to the end of the alphabet now, but we'll just be walking through, this is again, the training packet and each of the documents that provide some guidance around the process. This checklist is a summary of kind of the top 12 things that you do as part of the peer review. So it's really just to help provide that overview and reminder of where you are in the process. All of these things we've talked about already, and, but we wanted to just mention that this is a document that will be a reference for you to know what to expect and to see kind of where you are in that process. It also helps remind us that even though you'll go through these very core activities on site, that we still have the activity at the very end after you finish the visit, which is to make sure you finish that peer review report, which we always want to kind of re-emphasize that we want you to leave time in your schedule, like book yourself some time to wrap that report up when you get back. Because I know once people have been away from their regular job, it can be really challenging. You're catching up, you're making up for the time that you were gone. And so making sure you have a couple hours of reserved time to finish up that summary, but we'll show you the summary too. It's a very manageable type of report. So this is the overview checklist. And the next documents, what we call document C, Jeff, could you forward the slides, please, is a detailed version of all of those steps. So the checklist is the one pager that has the summary overview. And this document we call task details, which is all those steps, but with all the detail in how to do each of them. So this one can feel a little much when you're first reading it, but we want to make sure you know that it's because we want to have that step-by-step process, and so that you know what will happen at each of those steps. At the end of this document, which is a couple of pages, there on page 3, there's a list of items to bring with you when you go on your visit, and there's a list of what to do after the visit. So it really is just to try to provide all that experience from people who've done the reviews before, all the things that we've had questions about, so that you have all the information in one place about what you need to do. The other thing I would mention, just sorry about that one document, is that it's organized chronologically. So you'll see that in each of those orange bars, there's a time period designated. So like, as soon as you hear you're going to be a peer reviewer, here's what happens. And then a couple of weeks out, you'll want to do, so what will happen is there is a time period assigned. So what to do a month before, what to do 3 weeks before, what to do 2 weeks before, what to bring. So it just kind of walks you through that process so you know where you are. Anyway, thank you, Jeff. So document D is what we call this site visit preparation. It's really a logistics form to help us gather information. And this is the form that Jeff mentioned that the coordinator will help you, the person who's, or as the coordinator, if you're being reviewed, you help fill this information out for the peers, the peer reviewers, so that they have the information they need to plan for the visit. So it has details like where they, what the schedule is going to look like, what the location is there going to be a place that they can set up for the interviews? So if there's a conference room or a courtroom space or some kind of location that the interviews for all the team members will happen. It has information about the contact information for each team member. So if there's a question around, scheduling for those team member interviews, anything that's important to know, like, is there something special to know about parking or about what they can and cannot bring into the courtroom, things like that. So just a summary of those planning details and what to expect getting into the visit.
Is this the one that also talks about hotel availability and what's close to the courthouse, that kind of thing?
Yes. So suggestions of where to stay and where to eat and the times of the different main activities, like when is court, a little bit of detail about the program, just so they have a context.
Okay.
Very kind of brief summary, but that gets us started so that as peer reviewers, you know some information. So this next document is the online assessment, and actually we have this, there is a link in the other materials, and what happens is the program that's going to be visited fills out this online assessment, as Jeff mentioned. It's a pretty lengthy online assessment, but it gives both the program and you as peer reviewers a lot of summary information about all of the kind of practice and policy details around how the program is set up. So who the team members are, who participates in staffing in court, what services are offered, what does drug testing look like, what are your incentives and sanctions look like, what is training, you know, what kind of training happens, what does your evaluation look like. So just a lot of those details around the program's operation. And as we mentioned, this is a document that feeds into the summary best practice table that helps with that assessment of which best practices are being met already and which aren't yet. This document in the training packet is an appendix because it's pretty lengthy. The version that we have, so as Jeff mentioned, we're expanding peer review out to all the different court types. The version that's in the training packet is the adult treatment court version. And one of the things that you'll notice when you start to see the template of the questions, and then you see some of the versions that get completed by the program, is as you walk through the questions, there are some that, depending on your answer, may skip out the next question. So if something's not applicable, you won't have to answer, or you won't see the responses for those questions. So the numbering will be a little bit different. So when you get if you go on a site visit, or you're going to be a peer reviewer and you receive the filled out assessment, the numbering won't be exactly the same necessarily as the one that's in this training packet, but just know it's all in order, and they'll be pretty close. But just want to make sure that's not too confusing. It's just that with that electronic adjustment, the numbering changes a little bit. We also have, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to have a question to that. So those documents aren't specific to the specific court, like juvenile court.
They are.
It's just a global document, and then you just fill it out applicable to your information.
Yes, although there is a slightly different version. The one that we will be in the training packet is the adult generic, because that covers almost all of the types of questions that we see across court types. But there is a different version for juvenile, and there's a different assessment, and there's a different assessment for family. There's a slightly different version for the tribal programs because of some of the language changes, as well as team members and services. And then there are some specific questions around DUI court, around veterans treatment courts, around behavioral health. So the one version that you'll see is the adult one, but if you are a different treatment court type, we can get you the other versions. It's just for the training purposes. We wanted to help explain what the assessment looks like, and then what how it feeds into the best practice table, but there are slightly different versions depending on.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question.
But the questions are geared to get to the determination as to how the standards, the specific standards, are being implemented. So we're not asking a bunch of questions that are superfluous to the standards. They are almost all geared to the standards.
Yes, yes. And we do provide both that summary of the full assessment as well, just in case there are things that when you look at the best practice summary, you want to get more context about in looking at the full assessment. But yes, absolutely. That's why we have a lot of best practices to review and to pay attention to. And so it helps give you that information before you go on your visit, so that you can ask more specific questions and really hone in on those areas that are either unique and you want to highlight, or going extremely well, and that program could be a model to others, as well as those that might need training and support, other technical assistance. So try to help us with those different balances. One of the things, let me just say one more thing about that online assessment. So we have the guidance for the program is for, and for those of you who may have filled this out as part of, or a similar version as part of being a grantee on a BJA grant, or having prior peer reviews, this or other evaluations, this assessment, we anticipate that, or we guide the programs to fill it out and have that be a shared experience across the team. What we find in practical terms is that often the coordinator leads that effort and fills out what they can. Sometimes the judge helps with that. And then we want to have the team really review it, talk about it. Often there are sections that treatment might know the most about. So we want to make sure those treatment services are, the assessment is completed in consultation with your various team members, whoever's doing drug testing, whoever's doing monitoring. So just to make sure that all that information is as complete and accurate as possible. And then when you're on the visit, you might find that there are things that need to be updated, or that someone didn't quite understand the question or answer it the way that it was intended. And so then we can make a few adjustments, of course, as you go on the visit. So anyway, that's the assessment piece. While we have this document in the appendix, the one that you will want to review and take with you for the visit specifically is the one that the program fills out. So we'd like you to look at it before, so you have a sense of what to expect. But the one that you'll want to really dive into is the one that will be completed. Okay, Jeff, next one.
By the way, if you ever want to do a self-assessment of your own program, this is a very good document to use to do that.
Yes, and we can go ahead and run you a summary report if you want, if you fill it out. So you'll have the link to it. The link is in the training packet. All right, so this next document is really just a reference document that has to do with one of the questions on the assessment related to treatment services. So we ask about whether the program is providing different treatment models, and then this document goes through and describes what those are. In case you or the program has questions, it's really just to provide that background, because one of the purposes of our peer review is education and to make sure that people know what best practices are. And that really involves also understanding the various possibilities in terms of evidence-based treatment services. So we want to make sure people have access to this information, but it's used for reference. You don't need to do anything with it necessarily unless it helps to answer the question on the assessment, or to be able to probe your treatment provider, or answer any questions that come up during the visit. So this is a visual of the top of our best practices and standards table. So this is the summary document that has all of the different best practices and how we pull information from the assessment. You do not need to do that crosswalk yourself, because that happens once the team has completed the assessment. We at NPC will create this table, a summary table that I'll show you for you and for the program. But this is the reference point so that you can tell how those items are scored. So which question on the assessment leads into each of these best practices. And for those items that are either Y and N, which means yes or no, they've met it or they haven't, or those items that are fully met, partially met, or not met. So this document is really just for you to have as reference. The summary that I'll show you in a second, we don't keep the scoring for the results, just to keep it a little bit more streamlined, but at least this document shares with you all those best practices. So this is a great reference document. It's a good training tool for you to be able to both self-assess and also help be able to give guidance to the other programs. One of the things that you'll notice is that there is a column, a rating column that provides some information about whether or not this, whether or not the item is for administrative purposes or whether it is high priority or whether it is optional. So when you get your training packet, that left-hand column in the slide, you can see there are a couple of rows that say A, and those are administrative items. So whether or not the team has reviewed the statutes and whether or not they have an MOU, those kind of administrative items. And then there are 23 items that have an H, which means high priority. So the high priority items are those that we feel are really essential and help us guide kind of where you want to focus out of this whole list. What are the really very important items? Yes, Hannah.
So some of us have been around for a long time and we maybe have really old MOUs. How often are those supposed to be updated?
That is a great question. We do recommend that you review them every year to see if the team members have changed. We also have a document that has some standard elements that we think are important to be included in the MOU. So that's something that we could share if you wanted to make sure that your MOUs really cover the main kinds of components. So for example, does it include every team members, or it depends on if you have an MOU that covers all your team members or if you have individual ones with each agency, but we want to make sure that it specifies the team member's role as part of the treatment court team, that it includes what information is shared between agencies. So just a couple of those elements that are really important to make sure are in there. So, but then the main piece is keeping it up to date so that if you have transition and you have a turnover in your team members, if you have a new treatment provider or a new attorney, we want to make sure that they are brought in and that they're part of the current MOU. So Jeff, do you have particular guidance from your state office in terms of how often you want those to be updated?
I think your guidance is good guidance. It should be looked at on an annual basis. You know, because we do get turnover and changes that need to be amended. So.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Sure, thanks. And then I wanted to mention too, that as part of this table, one of the things to pay attention to as part of your preparation and before you go on the visit is that there are several items, about 10, that have an element of your participation in helping to code. So most of the table is filled out by the download of information from the answers that the program provides in the assessment. But there are several items where the peer reviewer does an activity that helps with that coding. And for example, in best practice 7 has to do with the elements of the consent form. We have a document that provides the essential elements, the 9 essential elements that should be part of your consent or release of information form. So we want to make sure that when you, as Jeff mentioned, part of the process is you'll get a bunch of documents from the program, their participant handbook, if there's a policy and procedure manual, if there's a release form. And so you'll have those documents. So we want to make sure you go through and look. So the preliminary coding comes from the assessment on that item, but you'll also check off to say, yep, they've got them all. There are several items that have to do with your observation of the program. So for example, dynamics that happen in the staffing or in the court session, what kinds of things you're going to be looking for. So there are, again, those pieces just to be paying attention to when you're getting prepared for the visit to make sure that you look for those various aspects of what's happening, those particular best practices. And then, oh, sorry, Jeff.
Another example of that is that the standards are very clear that the judge should spend a minimum of 3 minutes with every participant whether they're doing well or not doing well. That means that you need to have a watch on so that you can do the timing and determine whether the judge on average is spending, not on average, but is spending 3 minutes with each participant. Quite frankly, in the first go round, we found that when it came to participants that were doing well, judges didn't spend the 3 minutes. And it's important that they spend the 3 minutes with those that are doing well as those that aren't, for a variety of reasons that I won't go into now. But that's an example of an observation that showed up quite frequently in the final reports.
Yes, great, thank you. So those are worth paying attention to and making sure that so there are a couple that say, hey, ask team members about this or ask participants about this. So we just want to make sure that you're fully gathering that information when you're on site. I thought what I might do here is, can I go ahead, Jeff, and share? I'm just going to show the summary report, the summary table.
Sure.
Okay. And then we can come back to it. So I'm going to, if I can make this big enough for you all to see it. So you just saw that summary table, and then this is the one that it'll look like this, that will be filled out, that you'll receive for the program that you're reviewing, or if you're being reviewed or want to have a summary table, you'll get this for your own program. There's some information kind of summarizing some characteristics of the program. So when it started, common substances that are used, number of active participants, number of graduates, what the program capacity is, whether the program is serving different levels of risk and need. And then there's a table, just like the one that you were seeing on that in the slides and in the training packet, that has by key component, all of the different items, so the item number is the best practice number. And the reason we have them numbered is because some of them get referred back to in some of the other materials, what the practice or standard is. And then, as I mentioned, these letters are administrative. So here's one that's a high priority item. So frequent email communication between the court and treatment providers. And then this column, the results column, will get filled in. So when you receive it, it'll say yes or no, or fully met, or partially met, or not met. So that is what you'll get, is the summary of all the practices and the information from the program, or from the program's assessment. So this is an example here, item 7, that says, please check the consent form to make sure it has the 9. So you'll get a preliminary score or a preliminary result in this column, and then you update it based on making sure you've checked off. And if there's anything that they need to add, you can make a comment, and that can be part of the summary in the report. So does that make sense? Any questions about that?
I have a question. Once the summary is given to the court, is there a timeline to fix the deficiencies, or is that an expectation, a specific timeline to correct course for those things that are lacking or need improvement?
The final report includes a format for action planning. The action plan includes who will be responsible and a timeline for when the deficiency will be resolved. That's pretty much left up to the local court to determine what's reasonable for a timeline to resolve that deficiency. If it really looks like it's way out of line and it's an important thing that ought to be taken care of sooner, then I'll discuss that with the judge and the coordinator and see if we can negotiate something differently. But usually they're pretty reasonable timelines that the local court puts on them because they want to get them taken care of also. Yeah, that's the format there.
This is what the action plan looks like. So the recommendations that you'll make, the priority recommendations, and then, as Jeff said, who's responsible, what they're going to do. And this again is a Word document, so you can fill things out. They will be able to fill things out, and then what the dates are and any training needed.
You know, each court's a little different. There may be a new coordinator. It may take them a little longer to get something accomplished than it might somebody that's been there a while. So I think we have to be somewhat flexible on these timelines, but again, they need to be they need to be taken care of also.
Okay, should we go back to the slides, Jeff?
Yeah.
Any other questions about that best practice table or how to get the information you need? Okay.
For the peer reviewers, do we need to print that out, or are we going to get a copy sent to us to use?
So you'll have this packet with this version of the best practice table that has all the scoring information. You'll have it electronically. It'll be up to you if you want to print it for yourself to have as reference, or if you just want to use it electronically. And you will also get a copy of the one that's the filled out from the program you're going to review, that'll have all the results in it. So that'll also get electronically sent to you. So you can decide. Typically, I'm more of a hard copy person, so I like to have the document with me, but a lot of people just keep a copy on their, the electronic version. So that's up to you, but you'll have this material from the general material from the training packet. And you'll also, when you're the peer reviewer or being reviewed, either of those, you'll get the summary with the results in it that's specific to that program.
Thank you.
Yeah. Did that answer your question?
Yes, it did. Thank you.
All right, Jeff, would you like to move to the next slide, please? So we just thought that it would be helpful as part of this conversation around best practices and standards. And Jeff has mentioned the various standards for the different court types. So the adult treatment court standards, the family, the juvenile. We thought it might be useful to just mention that there's a lot of alignment, even though the standards and guidelines aren't exactly the same, and there is somewhat different focus, that there's a lot of commonality across the treatment court types and across the best practices. So things like, are programs identifying and serving the right people? Are they conducting screening and assessment to know who's eligible, to know what level of risk and need they have, what services they need, what particular levels of care they need? So that information about making sure we're identifying the right group for our treatment court and serving them in the right way. The role of the judge is important across all of our treatment court types. That's part of the treatment court model. Equity and inclusion is an essential piece of what we're doing and making sure that we're gathering information and monitoring any areas of disparities or differences, or also highlighting where culturally specific or responsive services would be beneficial to our populations. Services, a focus on what's the appropriate service, making sure that, as Jeff mentioned, we're really fully and efficiently and effectively addressing substance use disorders, as well as mental health needs, as well as other kinds of support needs. Those of you who talked earlier about case management, how important that is. So those pieces are now addressed in the standards. There are different focuses on incentives and sanctions and therapeutic responses overall. How do we respond to people and how do we help build this contingency management system, as well as monitoring and evaluation, making sure we're gathering information. And of course, in Montana, now that you do have your your DIMS data system, you have that consistency around how you can gather and track information. There are a few notable differences between some of our court types, and those of you who are in these other settings will know that the family court standards include a focus on the family-centered approach, treatment for pregnant women, inclusion of considerations that are related to child welfare. So while we know that in adult treatment courts, we have people who are parents, we have started to look at some of those elements across all of our programs, but those are certainly of specific interest and focus in the family courts. Our juvenile courts have guidelines related to family engagement. So that's a huge area of focus for the juvenile drug treatment court guidelines. School involvement, so making sure that we have school partners, that we have access to school information, that we're setting goals related to school success. There is some focus specifically around procedural fairness, and that is an element of all of our treatment courts, but definitely focused on specifically in the juvenile. There's an explicit focus on pro-social connections. And again, with our adult standards, we have that element around, or we have the standards that are around, having positive community involvements and natural support systems. But there's definitely that explicit focus in the youth side. And then knowledge of adolescent development, which is so important for understanding and serving our youth and young people. In the juvenile drug treatment court standards or the guidelines, there isn't as much focus as we see in the adults on a couple of areas, primarily because there has been limited research specifically on youth populations around drug testing protocols, around team member composition, and around caseload size. So there's some reference and some connection, not quite as detailed as we see in the adult side, but for our standards, when we look at how our programs are doing, we are gathering that information that we know works in the adult side until we have different kinds of information for what adjustments might need to happen on the youth side. So those are kind of the main kind of high level distinctions. And you'll see some of those differences reflected in the best practices around some of the juvenile and family standards have some additional items. Questions about that?
Questions about that? Ready to go on, Juliet?
Yes, and I realize we're now at another hour. So do we want to go ahead and take another break and give people a stretch and opportunity to?
Yeah, why don't we take 10 minutes?
Okay.
Let's get back at 10 o'clock.
Okay. Great. See you soon.
Yeah. Well, in the middle of a peer review. Yeah. Are we ready? Are we back?
Yes, ready. Okay, so our next document, document H, is the site visit schedule. And this is really a template to help provide some structure around the activities that will happen during the specific visit. It really, again, this is a Word document that can be used to fill in, or you can just use it as a guide, but the coordinator from the program or whoever your liaison, typically the coordinator, is the one who helps set up the court schedule. So the reviewer, the lead reviewer, will kind of work with that person to help figure out what is it that this site visit will look like. Typically, we start with those items that are already scheduled. So like, when is staffing, when is court, we fill in those different elements.
experience test.
Sorry. is there-
Yeah, so keep scrolling down.
Sophia, can you mute? Go ahead, Juliet.
Okay, thank you. So the schedule provides a couple of reminders. Some of the things that we learned a bit the hard way the first times that we were doing peer reviews around making sure we set up a lunch break, for instance, and making sure there's a little bit of time between interviews. Trying, if possible, to have the site that you're visiting provide a space for the peer reviewers to kind of leave their stuff, have other people come to them for interviews. Early on, we were really trying to go to the different people who were being interviewed, and that transition just becomes a little tricky. So if there are just a few things that might make the process a little smoother. Typically, we have the schedule set up for about a 2-day visit, but sometimes that might mean travel the day before or travel that morning and starting a little later and then going a little bit into the 3rd day. So it really depends on what the schedule looks like for the particular reviewers as well as the program being visited. We do suggest a few kind of core places to reserve time. So we suggest that you have time at the very beginning when you're first arriving to meet up with the coordinator or the judge to get through security, if there is that, to find your location, to make sure that you're oriented and you can kind of start the day. And it really is helpful to have periodic times to do some check-ins with the coordinator if questions come up that you need to ask, or if there are logistics that need to be assisted with or addressed. So trying to have some kind of, early first day, first morning, or whenever that first day starts, having that kind of contact time with the coordinator is really helpful. We also suggest that you have a little bit of time every day. So either at the end of your first day or at the beginning of your second day to debrief with each other as the peer reviewers. Pretty often we suggest that you have, about this 50-minute-ish time period for the interviews. Sometimes they don't take that long and you get a little time to debrief then. Sometimes you need more time. So if there's someone on the team, like for example, if the judge wants more time, you might want to set a little bit longer time period. Occasionally we'll have people who, like if there are 2 probation officers and they want to be interviewed together, sometimes we have a little bit longer just to make sure that you accommodate that. So depending on what the specifics are, or if you do have to go somewhere, so if you have to go to the treatment provider to do an observation there or to meet with those treatment provider teams, you might need travel time. So just whatever the logistics, just make sure to build it into the schedule and give yourselves time. But make sure that you do have time midway through the visit to touch base, to see what you're seeing so far, to summarize the kinds of highlights that you're making so that you're planning for that exit interview, the exit debrief that you have with the team, and you're not trying to do that all at the very, very end. So what are the themes that are coming up? Are there extra questions you need to ask the next people that you're interviewing? Are there other questions that have come up for the coordinator? How do you want to start thinking about those priority recommendations and those things? So it's really helpful to have a little processing time as you're going along. One of the things that we hear from peer reviewers, and we might want to check in with the folks that have done this before, is it's a lot of information all at once. You're interviewing people, you're seeing what's going on, you've got lots of information in your brain. So it's helpful to give yourself a minute sometimes to think through what you're seeing and bounce things off with your co-reviewers. The other thing that I wanted to mention is that you want to plan for, well, Jeff has already talked about the focus group. That's a really important thing to plan in advance with your coordinators. So because it might affect the overall schedule. Sometimes we've seen those focus groups happen in the evening because that's the most convenient, or because court happens until the end of the day and then there's the group. We tend to see, so that's a piece that you want to make sure gets built in before you fill in the interviews all around that. And for the exit, when you have that, after you've done all these activities on site, before you leave, making sure you have time with the team to share what those highlights are. What are the things that really stood out to you? What did you learn? What are those priority recommendations that you expect will be in the report? So as Jeff said, you don't want them to be shocked when they get a report and they find out that you had these thoughts about the program that you didn't share. So we want to make sure all of that kind of comes together at the end, but you also will need time with your co-reviewers, so your review team, to talk about what you want that exit to look like. So we typically try to reserve time on the schedule so that you have the exit interview time, the debrief time, and that you give yourself the hour before that, if you can, at least a half hour, but usually an hour is good, to really talk through what are the highlights, what are the recommendations, any things we still have questions about, just so that it can start to pull together at the end. With the focus groups, we do sometimes see programs offer them some type of incentive, like providing food for that group meeting. They can get, sometimes they'll get credit for a self-help meeting by coming together, or they might get transportation voucher or whatever, however you think might provide support or incentivize the participants for doing this extra contribution to the site review. So let's see, any questions about the scheduling, or Jeff, anything that you think that we need to mention?
I have two questions.
Sure.
One is there a contingent plan, since the coordinator's setting up the site visit, if we are notified that morning, which has happened to us when we're just staffing, that the judge has a hearing that comes up, not even a hearing, but he has like a trial comes up. And then so we're not staffing or having hearings that day. Is there a contingency plan that we should put in play when we are setting this up? You know, like this is plan A, but this might be plan B in the event that something comes up and the judge has a hearing and it just throws everything off.
Well, I don't think we want to throw everything off. If the judge has some type of issue that he's got to be away with, then we're going to have to do it without the judge being there, and talk to the judge virtually. You know, even when we get back home, if we've still got questions or interviews or whatever we need to do with the judge, even if it's an exit interview with the judge and we have to do it virtually, then that's what we need to do. We can't, when we get that close to doing a site visit, a site review, a peer review, we can't just all of a sudden decide either we're not going to do it or we're going to switch everything around. We'll just have to adjust. And if we have to, again, do it virtually, we'll do it virtually.
And that just gives me a follow-up, because we've had the, you know, it has happened that we've had to cancel the hearing for the kids. We usually have our drug court on Mondays. And so when he goes into a trial or has, so it is canceled for that time, and then it reconvenes the next Monday. So that would be the only caveat for that review happening, is that they wouldn't see it that time if it was on a Monday. I'm just putting it out there because that's when we have our hearings, and then they also review that whole process of our hearings with our participants. So that would have to be rescheduled for another time, or we could do it Zoom if
Yeah.
that were to occur, so
Yeah,
that they
we
could at
probably-
least have that component of a hearing with our participants?
We would probably do a Zoom meeting.
Because we
Depending
do
on-
right now during
depending on
COVID,
where
do
the peer
our hearings
reviewers-
by Zoom.
Depending on where the peer reviewers are coming from and whether they could get back there for a face-to-face hearing or staffing, we could also do it by Zoom if we needed to.
Okay. And then for the second question, when you mentioned focus groups and like an incentive to provide food or something, what budget does that come out of, since there's been such changes on what's covered and what is not covered?
Comes out of the NPC budget.
So it's not going to be an issue like when I've wanted to do things with our kids, but it's been funded through another source rather than through.
No, it's gonna have to be taken out of your budget if you're gonna do something like that. We've never done that. We've not provided food or anything like that for a focus group before.
Well,
Okay.
and you don't have to. I was just giving it as an example because we've seen it in some places. And like, for example, we did some juvenile peer review in New Mexico. One of the sites was able to get, because they had community partnerships, they had a restaurant donate some food. So like, there may be some opportunities to make something like that happen. If it doesn't work, that's fine. It's just, trying to find ways to make it,
You've also,
interesting for someone to sit in.
most of you received a $5,000 mini grant and a lot of you are using it for incentives. If you wanted to use it as an incentive to show up for the focus group, you could work that out.
Okay, I just wanted to be clear because I know that there have been changes and how certain activities are funded. So I just wanted to be clear about it.
Yeah, that makes sense. Absolutely. And I think different programs will have different resources and different options or different connections with the community. So absolutely do what you can. I think the main point there is just to try to make, this is a voluntary activity. It's not something that we want to make participants do necessarily. So it's because they're doing something extra. We want to make it worth their while and get some people there. So it's usually, unless you have it in lieu of a group that they have to be at, that's another way to help encourage people to participate, but it just will vary from program to program. And since you were talking about the juvenile programs, I would just mention too that the focus groups look a little different there. I think I said this earlier, but we do suggest to have a family focus group, so separate youth group and then a parent or guardian or caregiver group. Because they do have different perspectives on the program. And we've done those both virtually and in person. So depending on what's feasible and how you can access those partners, that can be helpful too, to get a different perspective. Okay, any other questions about scheduling? All right.
I just want to reiterate that from my standpoint, the core items that have to be scheduled are the staffing, the status hearing, and the focus group. And I think once you get those scheduled, you can pretty much schedule, the interviews with team members around all of that. And even if you have to do a couple of team members virtually, it's certainly a lot better to do that than to miss any of those three core activities that we have to observe.
Yes, and once those core pieces are on the schedule, typically what we see is the coordinator of the program that's going to be visited, your contact, will take that schedule to a team meeting and say, hey, fill in when you want to be interviewed, so those other slots become available. And then the peer reviewers aren't necessarily having to do that scheduling. The coordinator can help facilitate that because they're the ones right there.
Right. It's the local drug court coordinator that does that scheduling.
What are those core elements again, please?
Staffing, status hearing, and focus group.
And this schedule, when you walk through it, it has those reminders in it of make sure you have time for these different things. And when to think about travel. So, once you know when those core elements are going to be, and you can think about what the peer reviewer's schedule is in terms of how far they're driving or what that looks like in terms of when they can get there, then you can build in the rest of the time. Okay, let's move to the next document, document I. So one of the pieces that, Victoria, yes. So these slides are just to show you what these documents look like. If there are pieces that people have questions about, you'll see when you have the packet, you'll see the whole thing. But it was really just to give you a sense of which document we're on and what we're talking about. We didn't expect that you were going to have time to read the whole thing while we were here, but I can also share for the ones that I've been bringing up separately. It was just because I wanted to show a separate part of the form. But yes, absolutely. It's just to show you the type of document we're on. But sorry, Jeff.
You want to go on?
I'm just going to talk about this one for just a second, which is because you have then visitors coming into a program, we usually try to make sure that the program either uses their confidentiality form if they have one for any visitors that come to listen into staffing, because you are going to hear confidential information and sometimes see things that might be confidential. So we want to make sure that people feel protected, and that also helps the team being reviewed feel comfortable speaking freely, even though there are going to be some strangers in the room. So this is a sample in case the program doesn't have one or doesn't. So mostly it's if they don't already have one and they want to have everybody who's coming in sign something, this is one that they can use. We have this convention with the training materials that documents have different color text. In this case, the red is just what you would fill in. So it's the pieces that need to be updated for the particular program or for the particular situation. So this is just a sample again for reference in case it's useful for the particular visit you're going on, if that's helpful. And if they have their own form and they want you to use that, that's fine too. Okay, next document. So the team member interviews, as we've been talking about, are a really important part of the visit because you get to speak with usually each individual separately who's a core member of the team. Sometimes a program will say, hey, we have this organization that works with us. They don't necessarily always come to staffing, but they're a key, part of our program. And so you may find different interviews in addition to the core team members, but typically you have the core people who are on the team be part of the interviews. And we have this set up so that there's some information that you would want to look at before you go in. So some tips and details related to how to do these interviews, and a sample script here on that first page about what you can say when you're first starting to open up the interviews with someone. And then we have a list of sample questions. So this, there are a couple of things that are important about this. One is that depending on the responses that come out of the assessment, the online assessment and the best practice table, you will also come up with site-specific questions that need to be answered. So one of the roles of your peer reviewers or you as peer reviewers, is to make sure you've reviewed all those materials ahead of time and you've noted if there are things that are unclear to you, if there was something inconsistent about something you saw that you want clarification on, if there's a practice that you feel is important but they haven't met yet, to build in some conversation about what the barriers are, or what maybe it's something they don't know about, or maybe it's something that they have some training needs. So just trying to probe to get at those. So you will come up with your own augmented questions, but these questions are a list to give you some ideas about what are some of the important things. So I'm going to go ahead and share what those questions look like, because this is a good example, Victoria, of things that you probably want to see the whole thing. So let me just open, let me see if I can. So here's the schedule. Sorry to be scrolling. So this is the tips overview. One of the things that we do have as a supplemental document in the appendix, and we'll talk a little bit about, is some guidance around asking open-ended questions. So one of the things that we've learned about peer reviewers and doing these peer review processes is that some people who participate as peer reviewers have done interviewing or have done assessments or have done work where they are gathering information from people, and they have some background or experience in this area, and some people have never done that before. So you don't have to have had experience, but we found that some basic overview of what is it like to ask a good open-ended question, how to ask questions, like you'll see here some of the tips around what we call leading questions. One of the things that's really important about your role as an interviewer or role as a peer reviewer is to go in and make sure that you're open to hearing whatever is going to come to you. You may have some perception about what you expect, and sometimes you'll be right and sometimes you'll be far off. So it's really important to be open and asking questions that elicit honest feedback from the interviewee or from the participants in the focus group. So what we do is we have a few tips here about making sure that you're asking these open questions, and then the supplemental document is a little bit more detail about making sure that you ask open-ended questions and you're not closing down conversation because you're making assumptions, even if you don't intend to, in terms of the kinds of questions that you ask or how you ask them. So there are a few things that are important in terms of tips. And then we have this list we want you to think about asking all your team members at the beginning certain questions. So that kind of leads off each of your interviews. So for example, you're going to ask them about their role, how long they've been in that role, the training they've received, what they see as the successes and main challenge or challenges of the program, whether they see any conflict in their role as a treatment court team member and their regular professional duties. So these kinds of overview questions really help set the context. And then we usually ask about the program's approach to incentives and sanctions and responses in general, and then any suggestions they have. So it's important while you have individuals separate from the rest of the team to say, like, what do you see and what is it that you would recommend? Because those suggestions can help you as the peer reviewers define and also articulate some of the recommendations that you might have. We then have a set of questions that are specific to certain roles. And that might vary depending on how the program is set up and what the individual team members do in a particular program. But we do have things, specific questions for the coordinator. And by the way, that is another place when you're scheduling. I kind of said this earlier, to have a little extra time on your, whatever day that you're interviewing the coordinator, make sure that on your subsequent or prior days that you have a little time with them. You probably want a little bit more than your typical 1 hour slot, because often there are more questions for the coordinator. But this is where you want to make sure that you clarify information from the assessment, anything that was missing, anything that was not yet met. So trying to get as much information as possible. And again, without overwhelming yourself or your program that you're reviewing, but just trying to get as complete a picture of where the priorities are. We also have some questions. So then, I guess I should say too, part of the list of these questions helps identify which best practices they fit into. So there are some questions that you're asking that are going to really inform certain specific best practices. And we have that map here in case it's helpful as you're updating that table before you complete your review. So we ask about sanctions, particularly around jail sanctions. We ask about the data system and their use of it. So then we ask these other kind of more specific questions about particular best practices. Whoever's doing drug testing, you want to make sure you get a sense of the protocols. You have some questions for the judge. And then there is a set of treatment specific questions. So when you talk to the treatment provider or providers, there's some very specific questions around treatment. So that is what the interview, so basically the short story is we have some guidance, we have some suggested questions to make sure that that feels like a smooth exercise or smooth activity, and you will ask some specific questions that come up for you for that particular program. Are there questions?
And of course, are free to go beyond these questions and delve in further if you want, if you have other questions that have not been answered.
Yeah. And one of the things that we do encourage is that you be careful. One of the things that is a plus or a bonus for a lot of peer reviewers is that they get to ask specific questions that are of interest to them. Like, gee, in my program, we really struggle with this particular aspect. What do you do? And trying to get that learning community. And we also caution you not to overly focus on your own program. So that's a place where we want the learning and sharing. We want the back and forth. And your main role as the peer reviewer is to gather information about them so that you have what you need to be able to provide them feedback, because your role is to be the support and to be the summarizer of those highlights and provide recommendations. So it's a great opportunity. Those meetings are a great opportunity for sharing and learning. And we want to make sure you also have enough time to talk about what the peer review is about. So our next slide is about these questions. So we thought we might take a minute to have people ask questions, talk about things, see if there are questions, maybe even our peer reviewers who've done things before. Is there anything from your experience that would be helpful to share? Are there particular suggestions, or those of you who do information gathering or interviewing or assessment, what are some tips that you have around interviewing and how to get information without, you're asking some questions that might be a little bit sensitive or political, or there might be concerns that you just don't know about. So how do you ask questions without making people feel defensive or concerned, but that you're really just open to learning about them and the challenges and the successes that they have? So comments, questions?
So for interviewing and gathering more information, even with participants, we are big on saying, tell me more about that. So that way they can share, what they want in more depth for clarity purposes.
Great. Other experiences or suggestions or tips or questions?
All right, let's go on.
Okay. Okay, so this document is a supplement to the interview questions document. It's really just a reference point, like I mentioned, to make sure that you have the tips in advance. Part of this is logistic in being able to plan for who's going to take the lead. So because you are almost always going to have a partner in your peer review and maybe several, you want to talk about who's going to be the lead interviewer, who's going to take notes, how will that work? Make sure that you provide a little bit of background about what you're doing. Typically, the team members will know why you're there, but it's useful to provide in case there's somebody who just hasn't been paying attention or has lost track of time, to make sure that you say who you are and why you're there and what you're using this information for, and reassuring them that when we provide the summary report, again, we'll be protecting confidentiality in terms of summarizing all of that information and the feedback in aggregate form and not naming where this information came from. So one of the things that we've sometimes seen is that depending on who your peer review team is, if you have a judge on your team, often they are an appropriate person to conduct the judge interview, or maybe some of the attorney interviews. If you have a treatment provider who's a peer reviewer, having them be the lead on the treatment provider interview. So just thinking strategically about how best to pair up. And otherwise, anyone can be, any of your peer reviewers can ask any of the questions. But sometimes that can be beneficial to have the peers who have the same role take the lead in that way. Sometimes peer pairs will say, I want to be the one that interviews and someone else wants to be the note taker. And that's kind of the role that they play throughout the visit. Sometimes they alternate. So it depends on how you negotiate that with your partners. Again, this is a good one to make sure you review before you go, but it's not a form that you have to fill out or anything. It's just really a reference document. Okay, so the next two forms are documents that help us with our observations. So there's a staffing observation form, the pre-court staff meeting, and then there's a court hearing observation form. And the reason we have these is really to provide guidance to what to look for when you're doing the review. So it helps think about what are the kinds of best practices that we're going to be following up on. So you'll see in this document in the orange box, the list of potential team members. There's a space at the bottom to add other members that are part of the team that aren't on this list. But it helps look at a couple of the best practices on the table. We also have information about some of the interactions between who's leading the meeting and whether or not there's any particular information that's shared, so what kind of information about each participant is shared. One of the things that we want you to do here is record the start and end time, just like you will for the court session, and how many people, how many participants were discussed. This is because we find that the staffing is sometimes an area where teams are working on their efficiency or working on their communication or what is the right amount and detail of information to share. So we have some teams that share so much information that their staffings are extremely long and they don't get through everyone. Sometimes there isn't enough information shared and people don't really have what they need to help provide suggestions for responses to participant behavior. So trying to find that balance and also share what's important, but not too much, or not some of the stuff that, we also often have questions come up in teams around what level of treatment information is shared or what kinds of details. So making sure that you're observing how the interactions work, the efficiency, are there suggestions that you can make in terms of their operations to make that go more smoothly. For example, if the program doesn't have a summary document that they're working off of or that they are provided, sometimes that can help guide the process. So taking notes, this document again does not become part of the peer review. It's really in the sense that it's really for your own notes to help you keep track of the kinds of things that you noticed and to help inform the summary report. So it's not something that is attached to the report or comes together with it. Let's see, so this is just really a note-taking document. And Jeff, I don't know if you need any clarification around with the peer review, will the notes ever be considered part of the documentation for public records if someone requests them, or is it really just the report that's the
Just the report.
Okay, so people can feel free to take their own notes on these other forms and,
Yes.
okay, great.
Jeff, I can't remember with DIMS, when the peer reviewers show up, do we get a paper like that summary report? Because that was actually really important to view what those team notes looked like, though.
What the team notes look like?
So when, I can't recall, like, does the peer reviewer actually get a copy of the team notes staffing? Or do they not need to share that?
We usually don't, we usually don't deal with the notes at all. They're
Because it's talked about.
use them for their own purposes when they develop the final draft report. I don't know what we would do with the notes. We never collect them.
But so is the question about the peer reviewer notes, or is the question about the staffing, like the notes that the team members get on the
The
participant?
staffing notes that the team members are using.
Oh,
Yeah. So I mean, I would say in our experience, and I don't know how that typically happens, Jeff can respond to that in terms of Montana. We've seen for peer reviews, sometimes whoever comes into the meeting gets the copy and then you have to turn them back in. So like if there's a list of participants and their drug test results and their attendance at treatment and their whether they achieved goals, like that, whatever that list is of the summary of different progress for that week. If it's a printed document, that's often shared also with the reviewers, but then they have to leave it behind with the coordinator, so it's not something you keep. Jeff, have you seen that work in your courts?
is there a question there?
Oh, sorry. I'm just mentioning that because I don't know how it works typically in Montana.
That's usually how it works. The
Okay.
reviewers will get a copy of the notes off of the information system. And then they don't keep those notes. They turn them back in because of the confidentiality of the information.
Okay. Hannah, did that get at your question?
It did. I know because you learn so much about what is actually happening and being discussed based upon those notes. Sometimes they're very scant and not well updated, and sometimes they're robust.
Yes, I think that's a really good point. So I think as part of that, the confidentiality form that we showed earlier, that's partly to allow you access to everything that the team is seeing at that moment. Plus, for me, when I go on visits, because I don't know the participants, being able to see it together is a little easier to track who they're talking about at the moment. You don't need to know individuals, but it does help to get a kind of context of how much is shared around particular people and whether, like you said, whether that's an efficient process or not.
Are our DIM notes on our
I
juvenile
would request
for us?
a copy of those when I went into staffing so that you could see what the team is getting and whether what they're getting is adequate or not. And, that might be part of your recommendations.
I was just going to state that for our notes, as coordinator, I send those weekly notes from the previous week of activity to the team, and it's sent through our state transfer system. And everyone has already signed releases and confidentiality that they're mostly treatment providers that keep those notes. They aren't turned back into us because it's disseminated through the transfer system on a weekly basis on each participant's progress. So that's how we are doing it and have done it since I've been on board.
That's great. Actually, let me just make a clarification because I think I might have confused the topic. So it is totally fine and appropriate for the team members in your program. So the program team, the regular team, to get any of those notes, particularly if you have MOUs and data sharing agreements, like sharing of information, release forms, all that. Everybody can get that information. I was just talking about, as the peer reviewer, if you're an outsider coming into this program for the day and you're sitting in staffing for the day, you're not a regular member of the team, but for that day to have access to those notes. So we could, if that material is shared electronically, and I think this was what Jeff was saying too, like, let's make sure as peer reviewers, we request it so that you can also see it and see whether or not you have any suggestions for ways they might adjust their report or their summary document that they use internally. So we do want to make sure, oops, sorry, I think my internet froze. Can you still hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, good. So that's the distinction I was making, is what the team gets. We want the peer reviewers to be able to access for purposes of the observation.
I see, it's just not included, and they do not keep that or delicate information.
Right. So if I'm a peer reviewer and I come to visit your program, I might say, do you mind if I get a copy of what you shared with your team? But you could print it for me and then I would hand it back to you so that I wouldn't walk out the door with it, or at least by the end of the visit, I would make sure you got it back so that none of that confidential information is going out of the program.
Questions or comments here? Okay, you want to move along?
Yes, so the next one is about the court observation. And again, the idea with the court observation is that we have those same points to be able to pay attention to certain elements of what's happening, because there's always a lot happening in the court sessions. As Jeff mentioned before, the start and end time is really important. How many participants were heard? We often have one of the peer reviewers designated to keep track. Like he was saying, have a watch or have a stopwatch or a stopwatch on your phone to be able to see how much time is being spent with each individual participant. And then overall, are they meeting this best practice? We also sometimes find that there's other activity that's happening in court. So we typically say the time that the participant was called before the judge and then returns to their seat is the time period that we're looking at, even if there's also conversation happening about the person among the different team members. So we typically want to just track that. We want to make sure that we look again at who comes. So which of the team members are really attending the court session. And it's often interesting to talk, once you've had the staffing observation and the court observation in your subsequent interviews, to kind of check in and see, was that a typical court session? Because you are doing this point in time observation. It's a one-time thing. Sometimes programs react to having, visitors. And so it might be that it looked a little different today for whatever reason. So it's useful to think about that. Like, gee, we didn't see anybody remanded to jail. Is that typical? Or we saw 5 people. Is that typical? So just trying to see what people's perception is about, like, the observation that you've had a chance to be part of. We tend to, so in terms of the keeping track of which team members are there, one of the things that we do encourage as part of the review is that if you're doing your staffing and court observation prior to most of your interviews, if that's happening early in the visit, to ask usually you want to just be a fly on the wall, like you want to not interfere and change what they do, but it is useful for the staffing or for court to have the team members of the program you're visiting tell you who they are, so that you can keep track on your list of which roles are being covered. So making sure that they provide you some introduction, just so you can tell who's who, even though that might not be what they do internally. But really, just because part of the best practices includes who's coming to staffing, who's coming to court. We know that from our research that even though it's an investment to have all the team members come to court, it actually saves money in the long run. We see those courts operating more efficiently and having better outcomes, better participant outcomes. So it is an important best practice to observe to see who's participating in these two different key events. We also have some questions on the observation form that are kind of about logistical concerns. Because the court session is a theater and part of the learning process is for participants to see how other participants are responded to see people who are successful, even if you have some participants who are struggling, to have that opportunity to watch. We want to make sure, for example, that everyone can hear each other, that the court is comfortable, that there isn't any structure that's making it difficult for the participants to pay attention or to learn. So we have some questions about that too, just to kind of assess both the content as well as kind of the environment. Any questions about that?
How are courtrooms handling court in person at this point in social distancing and with the idea of like everyone needs to get to the front and listen?
I think it's all different depending on the court, depending on the setup. I think we could talk about that in a coordinators meeting if you want. Probably be a better place to discuss it than right here.
When do you have coordinator meetings?
First Friday of every month.
And do you send a link or something?
Yes.
I've never gotten one.
All right, Dee, we got to get you on that list. I'll put in.
I know I'm such a newbie. I just kind of fade into the atmosphere.
We will make sure Jeff gets that on his list.
And I will, since I only work 20 hours a week, I'll have to refigure some things to make that work.
It's the first Friday of every month from 9 to 10:30, unless it's a holiday weekend. I'll make sure you get an invite. I'm sure you're on that list.
I've just never gotten anything to even know that that existed.
Other questions?
Yeah, the other thing I was going to add to, like, there are a set of questions just observing the interaction between the judge and the participants, because there are so many elements of the role of the judge being so important in our treatment court model. So we do have some questions about what the judge does, how they do it, and what their interactions are like. So. Okay, any other questions about the court observation? All right, we're going to move into some information about the focus groups. And we've talked a lot about this, so I'll just say that this document is the overview on how to facilitate a focus group. Again, we have some peer reviewers who come from roles or prior experience where they have done group facilitation. That might be perfectly comfortable for them, and other people who've never had that opportunity or that experience. So it's important to, if you have not done this before, particularly to make sure you review some of these summary documents to give you some tips and suggestions for how to do it. We lay out the steps and we remind the peers of a few things, including, importantly, your role and why you're there. One of the things that I think it's sometimes difficult for the peer reviewers to do is to take off their hat that they have in their home program and put on the peer reviewer hat. So for example, going in, if you're a judge, to a peer review where you're observing another program, you don't have the role of making sure that people understand what's going on, or calling participants on something that may feel like, they're exaggerating or complaining, or, those kinds of things. So as the reviewer, you're there to gather information as an outside observer and to make this environment open for people to share honestly what their experience is. So it's really helpful for you in your introduction to say, I work in a treatment court and here's what I do, but that what I'm here to do is to listen and to gather information. So it's worth just kind of reminding ourselves as we go in that we have a specific role here. We don't have to explain the program's rationale or why they might do things a certain way. Our job is just to hear and gather and ask questions. Just a reminder about confidentiality, that we don't want to use people's names or identifiable descriptions in any of the summary documents. If you have questions about something that feels like it might identify a particular person or role, that's something that you can talk with Jeff about or me about, and we can make sure to help provide some guidance or there. And then, as Jeff mentioned earlier, we don't want any team members from the program being reviewed participating in the focus group. That focus group should just be the participants and the peer reviewers, so that the participants can feel comfortable sharing.
There's a pretty good preamble description for introducing the focus group, I think, on this.
Yes, do you want to do that next page? Actually, the next slide shows a summary of that, and that's a good segue into this next document. So we call it a disclosure form. It's basically a confidentiality form. And this is a summary document that you can use to fill in, again, this yellow highlighted part, you'd fill in based on the name of the program that you're visiting, and any information that's specific to it. But for the juvenile programs, the juvenile drug treatment court programs, there is a form for the parents and guardians as well as a form for the youth. But in our typical programs where we just have one set of participants, this goes through what the background is, what the focus group is about. It's basically giving them their rights and responsibilities. Like they don't have to answer questions if they don't want to. They can decide if they want to leave. They're not paid. That kind of basic information that helps them know what they're supposed to do. And we typically, then there's a section at the bottom that if they have questions, they get to call Jeff. If there's anything that, if they're in person, which is typically how we're trying to do these, the program might share it with the participants, or you can bring copies and make sure to hand them out at the group. They don't have to keep this form, but it's just for them to have access to the information if they want it. And we typically suggest as part of the overview when you're doing the intro, and we'll show you that in a second, that you walk through that form to make sure people don't have questions. Any questions about that? All right, so the next document is the focus group questions. And this has a set of the guiding questions for each of the kind of the general type of questions. And again, as the peer reviewer, if you are observing something by your visit, or you've heard something from some of the interviews that you've conducted by the time you get to the focus group, there may be specific questions that you want to ask that are in addition to these. But the main thing is to try to set up a comfortable environment so people feel like they can trust you, that they answer, that you're going to really listen to them. We typically have that you walk through kind of the guidance around what the ground rules are, and make sure that you're facilitating the group, not necessarily requiring or asking every person to participate, but making sure that if you have someone who's really talkative, that you pause, every once in a while and give other people an opportunity to share if they want to. Often we suggest that you have a few minutes after your group that is not booked in, so that you can say to the participants, I'll be here for a few minutes afterwards, or 15 minutes or whatever, if you want to share anything, but outside of the group, or you can make sure that they have access to you to share anything that they'd rather share privately. So the questions are primarily about what they like the best and what is the most challenging for them, how they're treated by different team members, so and the program as a whole. And we ask specific questions about their experience with the drug testing protocol, with treatment, so that you can really verify and clarify some of the information that you're getting from the interviews and from the best practice assessment. Any barriers that the participants feel they're facing in terms of their ability to be successful or ability to successfully complete the program, and then any suggestions. And then in the report, when you summarize it, there's a special section for participant feedback that asks, what were the things they liked? What were the challenges? What are their suggestions? And so this is, as you've heard from other people already, really interesting. It's usually a highlight of these visits, is hearing some interesting nuggets of feedback and suggestions from the participants. And they often have some really creative and useful ideas. They often also will have complaints, and that's important to listen to and pay attention to, and try to make sure that even if they're getting into a rut about concerns, that you help them navigate to suggestions or solutions at some point before the end of the group. And try not to take it personally as a treatment court professional if they have concerns, because sometimes that's hard too. Any questions about that? All right, we just wanted to give you a moment to talk about, again, anybody who has experience facilitating groups, running groups, doing peer reviews. Do you have any other tips or suggestions? What has worked well, what has not worked? How do you manage if someone's speaking a lot or not at all? How do you probe without leading or pressuring? Any suggestions for people or tips?
I have a question in terms of selecting the teams that go out. I don't know if there's any particular methodology for that, but to me, it seems like it would be more beneficial if the teams that go out to peer review could be teams that are from the same team. I know it seemed like it was more difficult to try to collaborate once we had completed the peer review, when your partner is across the state or has a completely different schedule. Is there a reason that we mix up those teams?
Well, I think there is a reason, and that is that you get a diversity of opinion and experience when you mix teams rather than have two people from the same team go out. I guess that would be my initial response to that. I think it's better off to mix the team. On the other hand, I think we want to try to get people that are geographically not too far from the program being reviewed. But I think it's better to have a diversity and not have two people that are very familiar with each other, very familiar with their own drug court, coming out and I don't know, laying that on another drug court.
And I can just add too that states and programs do it really differently. So there definitely are some benefits of having more examples and experience and learning across different teams that come into the peer review. And there are some logistic benefits to, as you're saying, Shelly, to having people from the same team, both in terms of travel and scheduling and trying to get, out of the court at the same time. So there are definitely benefits to different approaches. And I think Jeff will kind of keep in mind how to balance those things as you're trying to do assignments and scheduling for the future.
Other questions or comments at this point? I want to keep moving along so we get done
Yeah.
in time.
Jeff, are we ready for, it's 11. Do we do another break at this point? I'm losing track of.
Oh,
I think we should do a few minutes maybe and.
all right, you want to take, let's take 10 minutes. We'll come back at, how about 10 after 11?
Okay. Just make sure people get a moment to distract you.
Okay. Juliet, are you there? Juliet,
Yes.
do you know how many pages are on the green pages that need to be copied and taken?
You know, I don't offhand, but I should, let me see if she's,
Just wondering if I should make some packets of those and send them out. How much of a burden it is to go ahead and print those off.
yes. I should have that today, so I can let you know.
Right.
The
That's-
person in our office who's gonna compile it into that separate PDF, I can look at it when she gets it to me.
Okay. All right, you want to go ahead?
Yes. Sorry, I'm just gonna make myself a note to look at that and remember. All right, so we are back. So we're towards the end of the site visit now. We're looking at the exit interview. So this is a guideline document that helps us prepare for and conduct what we call this exit interview or the debrief for the team that you're visiting. So again, it happens at the end after you've had a chance to do all of your other information gathering and have a chance to debrief with your peers about what you want the highlights to look like. This document has a description at the first part of the page around what the process should look like and how to structure the comments that you make. So expressing appreciation and providing an overview of the process again as a reminder, where the highlighting the positives and the strengths and the unique aspects, and then highlighting a few key suggestions. Typically, we do want to follow a similar kind of process to our.
We could peer review from the bed.
For our contingency management system. Oh, we've got somebody who just needs to mute themselves, I think.
Yeah. Those two. Are you on the Wi-Fi?
Somebody needs to mute.
Thank you. And so to really highlight a bunch of positives and strengths and not overwhelm them with too many recommendations. So trying to have that balance, or we have the positives outweigh the challenges or outweigh the recommendations. We have some tips in addition to, as we have with all of these documents. So the process description and the outline for what to cover, a few tips about how to conduct that group. And then we have an actual form that provides a structure if you want to use it as something to actually write on or fill in when you're preparing. It has space for the strengths that you want to highlight, those commendations that you want to make, and then the key recommendations that you're going to talk about. So that document can really help you if you have summarized everything in one place with your team and then go through this process. That can be put directly, those pieces can go directly into the summary report. So we're trying to make this structured so that it makes everything feed into everything else, and it makes it a little bit easier to get to the end game. Any questions about this part of the process? One thing that I do want to mention is that in terms of the conversation at that meeting, to some of our suggestions include really focusing on what you see as the main programmatic issues, not to get into any particular concerns about a specific team member, not to get into anything that's considered too controversial or that could create tension or negative feelings across the team members. So if you have those kinds of political or controversial or difficult discussions to have, to think about talking about that with Jeff or building in different conversations. So you can pass that information on or debrief that with Jeff to figure out kind of how to handle anything that's sensitive or difficult, but to try to keep the exit interview kind of focused at the programmatic level and deal with those issues that are kind of more about process, policy, procedure, practices, meeting best practices in terms of the team as a whole.
What are some examples of areas that might be of concern that you would not want to talk about?
So one example could be if there's a team member who's really not participating. So if you have a gap somewhere where someone's either not engaged or doesn't seem to understand the treatment court model, really needs training in some area, if there's something kind of personnel or specific team member related, that can be a little bit tricky. We had an example in one state around a political issue where a state office for the public defender was not supportive of treatment courts, and so was preventing their public defenders from participating. So like political kinds of issues are really not as much the scope, although you can talk about, potential strategies and solutions or acknowledge some of those challenges. I think sometimes those are bigger things that would come to Jeff, or if you see, training needs or resource needs, like we sometimes will see challenges around particular gaps in service just because the community doesn't have access to them. So, those are things you can still address, but I think the biggest challenge that we've seen around that we would say kind of avoid is if there's something personal about a particular team member or about a particular kind of political issue.
Okay.
Are there things, Jeff, that come in that category for you, like trying to talk about it outside?
Not really. That's why I asked the question. I wasn't sure what kinds of issues those might be, but
yeah. We had one site visit where one of the team members brought up concerns about harassment and kind of like more HR related stuff. So like, we just felt like that was an issue to tackle separately, not to bring to the exit interview because of the dynamic that it was creating within the team. So anyway, use your judgment, but it's just, I wanted to just mention that I'll offer Jeff as a resource and myself as a resource that if there are things that are kind of sticky that you want to get feedback about, those might be best to leave out of that exit interview because you're kind of trying to consolidate everything quickly. And if you think you need to process how something's going to be addressed, that maybe you wait on it and get some feedback.
Okay.
Yeah, those don't happen that often, but just occasionally. Okay, super. So we're now ready to start talking about the report. So as I mentioned, you get done with your visit, you have these last things that you need to wrap up. Give yourself some time to do that. Make sure that you and your peer reviewers talk about who's going to do what. So who's going to write which sections, or who's going to draft which sections, and how are you going to put it together? How are you going to coordinate and communicate with each other? This document is actually a summary. So as I mentioned, when we were looking at the best practice table, there are a set of items, about 23 items, that are high priority items for best practices. Those are the ones that we have in this summary table, as well as in the template for the report, which you'll see next. This document has sample recommendation language for each of those high priority items. So if you pick a few of the best practices that are in this high priority list, the text for the recommendation is drafted for you, and you just need to adjust it based on the local specifics of what you see or what you think would be useful. So that is a way to try to make that translation into the report a little simpler. It's very likely that you will have a recommendation or some recommendations that are not necessarily specifically tied to a best practice, but might be more about their efficiency of their staffing, or something that you have observed or heard. You know, maybe there's something that's really challenging to the team and several team members brought it up to you and you want to make that a recommendation. So there may be things that you add to that recommendation list that are not from here, not from this list, but or not specifically best practice oriented. But if there are, and probably some of them will be, at least there's some text that you can draw from here. The next document is the report template. And so this is a document that I think what I'll do, let me see if I'll bring this up to you if you're okay with that, Jeff. If I can share here. So this is the report document. I just want to share what it looks like. Oh, sorry, this is this recommendation language. Okay. So what you'll notice when you get these documents, again, this is one that you'll have separated out from, they'll be in the packet, but you'll have a separate Word document that has this template. And the idea is to try to make the summary report writing as simple as possible for you. So there's some text that's in blue and some that's in red. The red is the instruction to you as the peers. So once you've written the report, you can delete all that red text. The blue is are different topics that you would fill in. So the name of the program and the date you went and who your reviewers are. There's also a section you'll see down here that is the participant feedback, right? So you'll fill in the strengths that they suggested about the program, or they indicated the challenge or challenges, their suggestions. So anything that's in blue is just something that you fill in, and then you can delete that text too. So the idea, sorry, here I went. I'm making everybody really dizzy, I'm sure. Okay, so the idea with this template is go through it, read the instruction, delete the instructions, fill in the blue text, and then delete the text. So fill that in. It's organized to have this little overview section, the summary of the positives, so what they've accomplished so far. And this is where we have this list of the 23 high priority items. So out of that full table, we have a set of them that are here in this list. What will happen when you get your summary document from, when you get the best practice table for the peer review, you will also get a version of this template, and only those items that they have fully met or have met in a yes/no best practice. So if they've met the practice, those will show up on this list. So you don't have to do the crosswalk. So that will be, and then there will be blanks, like if they didn't meet this 50-day or less, which is a common one, this item here will be gone from so this is the list of what they've achieved. So this will be gone, and all you will need to do is delete that space. So it'll just be blank. It'll only show you for this program what they've achieved out of these 23 items. So you will have a subset of these that will already be in this list. And then if there are other things that you've observed or that you've noticed from the table or from the interviews that you want to say, hey, these are some other really great things that you've done, you can add those other positives or highlights, or if there are other best practices that you want to add. So you can adjust this list, but it will start off as the list of things the program has accomplished. Then the list here, anything that's from this list of these 23 that wasn't met. So if they're not met, those will pop up in a list here on this section of the report. So you'll start with a list of the things that are unachieved. Then your role as the peer reviewers is to take those items that you had highlighted from the exit interview. So what were the key recommendations, these priority recommendations, and then you can decide how you organize them in terms of what order, what's most important, and what things might not have been from that best practice list, but were other things that you felt were really important to highlight. So the main point is that some of this will be pre-filled, but at least then you'll have to kind of go with your experience in the program and with the visit to prioritize and organize those, and to write up the recommendation language. So if there's recommendation that's not from that other list. Does that make sense so far?
Yeah, I guess I might add that this is a change from the first round. We did not have any of the pre-filling done in the first round. And it was a suggestion from actually Judge Nisley that we try and automate some of this. And so this is a result of that.
Yeah. So you'll be testing it. We'll see how it works out. We might need to adjust it once we try it, but that's the idea, is that you start with some information and make this report like just one step a little bit easier to write.
Yeah.
And then, as we talked about before, there's this section around participant feedback. So once you've done your focus group or interviews, depending on how that works out in terms of getting feedback, usually it's the group, you'll add in from the questions, these cross-reference to the document that had the focus group questions. What were the strengths or the positives, the things that participants liked, what was challenging for them, what their suggestions are. And then you have room to highlight anything else that was really notable to you. So is there anything innovative that the program's doing? Any concerns that really don't fall within a best practice or a priority recommendation, but you want to share? Other successes, other training or technical assistance needs. So Jeff will know that. Questions that you might not know the answer to, but you want to put in the report, or you might just ask those separately. But there are sometimes things that pop up that you want to have a place to put them. And then the recommended next steps leads into the action plan. So this is the part that is already pre-written for you. You can, of course, make any adjustments to any of this text because it's in a Word document, but basically the idea is this is part of the template, and that section that is the action plan, you would fill in what your top 5 priority recommendations are here, since that's blue text, but then the program is responsible for filling it out. So they do the next steps in terms of the planning around who's going to tackle which of these recommendations and what will they do about it and when.
What if we want to do more than 5?
This is a Word document, so you just add a row. It's totally fine. We just want to recommend, I think this is, again, something, Jeff, that you might want to work with the peers about in terms of particular situations. The main thing is that we don't want to completely overwhelm a program, but if you have a few recommendations that seem very achievable, that would be quick to do, and then there are some that are more important, this table you could shorten or expand. It's just a Word document. The main thing is to kind of keep in mind not to give them 50 recommendations, because they might be like totally overwhelmed and not know where to go. So this is just to give them the first priority, but you can give guidance around how many you want, if you want them to give more than that.
Who tracks if those timelines are completed? Like if it's a, really lacking of a best practice, who follows up on that?
Hannah Halden follows up.
Hannah has enough balls in the air. She can't keep track of already.
I feel the same way. Actually, I guess I would say that really the local coordinator and the local judge need to monitor their own action plans and see that stuff gets done. If I can find the time to do it, I'll do it. That's the best thing I can answer. I mean, we need to all be sure that we are moving to getting these things done.
Yes. So yeah, the reports do come back to Jeff, of course. And I think that's part of that conversation is how are they going to fulfill those items and what's the follow-up for it?
I mean, I'll keep track of where there are training and technical assistance needs. I don't know that I'm going to have time to follow up with every drug court on their action plan. I think people have to take responsibility for that. And I think they will. They do.
Yeah. And then 3 years from this visit, when they get visited again, the expectation would be not to have the same recommendations still lingering, right? That hopefully they will have made progress.
Right.
And then the last piece of this report that you share is the checklist of the whole table, the best practices table. So in our new process, that when you get this report template, it will already have inserted in it the best practice list that you got separately that the program has looked at. So it will already have that full table that you've seen before with the results from the program. The only thing you would do is update anything that you learned changed because of your observations or updates because you've observed something and they've now fully met a best practice, or something wasn't quite the way they had described it in the assessment when you got there, so you want to change it. So any adjustments that you make, this version of the table will be your updated one, but it'll at least pre-populate it for you so that you have the one that they started with. And that's the report. So basically you have those summary of all the positives, summary of the recommendations, any other highlights you want to make, what was the participant feedback, and then the action plan that mostly they fill out, you just populate with the recommendations, and then you update the best practice table. I'm going to stop sharing so we can just check in. How's that feeling in terms of the summary report? Any questions about that? Those of you who did it before, Shelly and Hannah, did you have any feedback about how best to tackle the report, time that you need to allocate to finish it?
Just to be brutally honest, I had Jeff write it because I hadn't scheduled a whole lot of time I didn't have weeks in advance to kind of plan to be off court. Thank you, Jeff.
And for me, this is why I think it would be helpful to have teams that are in close proximity rather than, because the collaboration of it was the most time consuming. Trying to figure out who was going to write what piece and how we'd get it back and forth to one another. And
agreed that the collaboration is difficult when you're trying to get it. I think Jeff and I just spent like the long evening, kind of we just spent the whole day, like right up until, I don't know, I think it was like 10 at night, just sitting, writing out everything we were going to put in the reports.
Yeah, and it is really helpful to plan that in advance if you can. So to make sure that you designate some time after the visit, or know when you're going to know if you have your co-reviewers to try to coordinate, like when are we gonna talk and when are we gonna process. We're hopeful that some of the preparations now that we're building into the exit interview will give some support for the at least selecting and prioritizing what the recommendations are. But it takes a little time to just put everything together and make sure you have everything that you want included.
Well, you know, just listening to that part that you guys worked late into the evening. I have an evening job, and the only other time I'm not working on the weekend is Sunday. So I work my 20 hours a week for the court, and then I work 7 to midnight Monday through Thursday, and then Friday and Saturday I work late. So this would be cumbersome.
And
to figure out that.
I agree with Dee, and I'm having a similar concern because we were required to give 2 people to this program. One is our drug court coordinator, and the other was someone that was volunteered or voluntold. But my primary job is to be an attorney. And so doing all of this extra, like I'm not part of the drug court coordinator meetings. How am I supposed to know what updates are happening related to this? It's not my primary job. And I sit on a board outside of this and do volunteer work. This means a huge amount of overtime and coordination on top of my regular job, which already works me 40 to 45 hours. And the state has had a problem paying my overtime just to do my regular job. So I'm trying to understand, by having other drug court team members be peer reviewers, but either they're not state employees or they're not a drug court coordinator, with that being their primary position, how are we working this with those considerations in mind?
Well, and I can say too, one reason that we have a lead reviewer and co-reviewers is that there are people with different circumstances. And it may not be that those of you who have limitations around your time and availability could reasonably take on the report. Maybe you're the one that reviews it, or maybe you're the one that compiles a small part of it. So there are ways. That's partly why you try to divide up the work. But it is helpful to have those conversations. So perhaps you'd be able to be paired with someone who could take on the primary role of writing it, like a coordinator who has that, well, not necessarily flexibility, because I know everybody's super busy, but just that sense of having that opportunity. And then the role of the co-reviewer in this case for you guys would be to weigh in, provide feedback, review it when it was written, or have those conversations to prepare the other person to kind of do the drafting. So Jeff, what's your suggestion in terms of logistics?
Well, I guess a couple of things. Number one, we're probably not talking about most people. I mean, there's 52 people on this training. Most of those people will do one peer review in the 2.5 to 3 years.
Right.
So, that's a certain amount of time, but it's not a lot of time. And I guess the second thing is, if you're at a point where now that you have seen what's involved and you are not willing to continue to be a peer reviewer, then let me know. I will be doing some of the peer reviews as well as I did before. We'll find a way to cover if there are some of you that feel like this is too much of a burden and you won't be able to do it.
Well, I
don't look at it as a burden. I look at it as I have obligations to provide for my family, because my main job with the court is only 20 hours a week. So I've just recently going into my 4th week of working.
If you feel like you cannot do this, then just let me know. Okay?
So I would, and for me, my situation's obviously different, but it's not even that. We haven't talked about budget, travel, overtime, or reimbursement expenses. And before I make that decision, I would like to know how those things are going to be handled for us that aren't drug court coordinators or state employees.
Yes, we will be getting to some of that conversation in just a couple slides.
Great.
Yes. Jeff, would you share the slides again, actually? And then I'm just going to go through the next couple kind of fast, but we have one of the things that we found from other peer reviewers is that it's helpful to them. You can go to the next one, to have some samples. So we have a few samples in the training packet that are just for you to be able to see what it looks like when someone fills it out. They're examples from another state, so it's not exactly the same as what it will look like for you. And you're the first state to have the automated download of the best practice items, so that will be different. But so the next two slides are just the two sample reports so that you can know that they're there, and that can give you some idea of what the length is, what the recommendations look like, those kinds of things. So just trying to give you some ideas. And then you can go back one slide, Jeff, to V, which is the, so next one, sorry, so many documents. So this is a document that's specific to Montana that has a lot of those policy questions and answers that are related to the procedures around the peer review. These are kinds of questions that typically come up. So we have this document to help be a reference for those questions. And I'm not sure, Jeff, if you feel like it would be helpful to walk through a few of these. I was going to say some of the questions that typically come up are things like, how much time is this going to take? Can we share information outside of the peer review? Because the peer review final report is a public record. Those individuals who want a copy would request it from Jeff or from the OCA. And the main point is that we typically are going to be, because we're creating a learning community, there is sharing that will happen, and we want to make sure that unique and fun and creative ideas are shared. But if there are concerns, that we want to be sensitive to making sure that we're not gossiping around program needs or program issues that are happening if you happen to see things, because we want it to be a positive experience for all of us to be part of this process and make sure that programs feel comfortable that this is viewed as a kind of learning opportunity and not something that's going to be an overall negative experience. We want it to be a positive experience. So the question around how long the peer reviews last is typically 2 days. Sometimes it takes the third day for when we build in travel or the coordination of the schedule. Sometimes that happens depending on how the schedule ends up working out with the peer reviewers. We've already talked about kind of the 3-year rotation possibly. And then how do the peer reviewers kind of get combined? So let's see, funding. Jeff, I'm going to pass this part along to you. Do you want me to open up the document so you can see the full document? And then you can talk a little bit about the travel costs and things.
I don't know if that's necessary. We have a separate pot of money that we will use to reimburse people for their hotel, their travel, their meals, their per diem. The legislature set up a opiate manufacturer's licensing fee as a result of the Attorney General's support, and we will pay for expenses out of that pool of money. We are not in a position, of course, to pay for overtime or additional time that it may take for certain individuals to carry out this. And I don't know, in our previous round of doing peer reviews, we had judges, we had county attorneys, we had public defenders, we had coordinators, all pitching in and doing a peer review. And I suspect that we'll be able to do that again.
Great.
So I have a question, please. Each peer reviewer would then be obligated to pay the expense upfront and then have reimbursement. Is that correct?
I'm trying to work out a situation with fiscal so that we can, I don't have a, what do you call it? What you guys have, a credit card, a state credit card. And either I'm gonna have to get a state credit card so I can put hotel rooms on there, or we're gonna have to figure out a way to, I think, pay in advance for hotel rooms. I think when it comes to mileage and per diem, you'll have to submit travel vouchers. But the reimbursement for travel vouchers takes usually a maximum of 2 weeks. So that shouldn't be too much of a problem, I wouldn't think, for anybody. Last time when we did this, I had to do a couple of hotel rooms and stuff on my own credit card, and I really don't want to do that. It's a real problem trading here and trading there to get that taken care of. So we'll figure out a way to at least get hotel rooms paid for in advance.
Is that something that we can put on our state card?
Well, you could, but I don't want it coming out of your budget. So I don't know. I've asked the question and I haven't gotten an answer yet, but we'll figure out some way. I don't want it taken out of a local drug court's budget.
Are there other questions about the policy piece? Or I know one of the things that we have in the policy questions and answers has to do with conflicts of interest. So if Jeff approaches you to be a peer reviewer and there's some reason you don't feel comfortable doing the review at all, or doing it with this particular program because of a connection or conflict or possible conflict, then just let him know.
Yeah. And as far as discussion of your experience, I guess, outside of the process, yeah, the final report is public information. But on the other hand, I think you have to use good judgment about what you would want discussed about your peer review when you're a peer reviewer for someone else. That's not been a problem that I'm at all aware of, but I guess it's a matter of, using good judgment.
Yeah, and since Jeff reviews the reports, he can point out if there's anything that he would suggest in terms of language, but yeah.
Right. And I have edited reports and, dealt with judges and stuff around how to say things that will not be problematic, with the community or the media or anybody else. So if there are a need for a way to soften things so that they're more acceptable for one of our local drug courts, we're certainly willing to do that. And we can always talk verbally about things and soften things in writing.
Great. And Babette put a note in the chat about if payments are made on the state pro card, they can be reimbursed to by a different pot of money. So that's a good lead. And Jeff, you'll get back to people about those elements of the reimbursement process.
Yeah.
I just have a question. Did the state ever consider just having a dedicated position for peer reviewers to go around to the courts where they're hired and that's just all they do? That's their position, their job?
The answer to that question is no.
If I might, as somebody who did a couple of these, maybe 3, I think, and probably this is a bit natural, but I think we're overthinking this. It really is a pretty easy process to go out and do these reviews, and it's kind of fun, so.
Thank you, Shelley.
Thanks, Shelley.
I
just
would
thinking
agree.
From the
This is
timeline
probably-
or the energy and the time put into it, I guess it wouldn't be an issue for me if I hadn't just taken on another position. So that's what my concern is.
I would agree with Shelley. If you're really interested and have the ability to spend a few days away from your job in your home, it's an opportunity to learn a lot about your own court, about other courts, and best practices, and you'll get a lot out of the experience if you have the ability to do it.
I agree as well. This is Layla, and I did it too. And I learned a lot, and I met a lot of amazing people. And it's not as bad as it sounds. It really isn't. And it is a learning experience that we all actually, as coordinators, really need to be on top of this stuff, because it is a lot to know to be a coordinator. Like I said, my first year was pure hell, and I'm still learning things after 7 years. I think it's worth it. It's not as bad as it seems, you guys. It really isn't. And then when we did it, we didn't even have a training like this, and it still wasn't bad. This just lays it all out. That's just my 2 cents.
Thank you.
Yeah, we may have gone overboard in laying things out and providing instructions and providing formats. And I mean, this is a pretty extensive layout. It is a little overwhelming when you look at the amount of material, but it's all structured to be helpful and to be used if you want to use it.
And I do want to say too, I understand. I'm a single mom with 2 children at home, and I have no family in Montana. And I work 2 jobs. I work at a casino as well, a second job. So I do understand the frustration, but it's really not that bad. And it just takes planning, and it can be done.
Thank you. Now
Other
let's
questions?
walk through,
Sure.
oh, sorry, go ahead, Jeff. We could, yeah, any other questions? I was going to say, I know we just have a few slides left, so I want to make sure we get through things, but absolutely plenty of time for questions. Okay, this slide is the contact slide so that you have access to how to reach Jeff or NPC. We have both Shannon and me here so that you can reach either of us if you have questions about the process or about the forms, or you have suggestions or need anything, let us know and we'll try to make it work. The next document is, as we mentioned earlier, the consent form information. So this has the elements of the consent form, those 9 items that are part of the checking off. Best practice 7 to make sure that you have the different elements in the consent form that you're looking at. And they're also in the manual in the packet that you'll get. There will be another couple of sample consent forms. So if you just want to say to the program, hey, take one of these, or they have a form that's really not sufficient, there are some examples for how it looks where things get incorporated in. The supplement, so the next slide is just the supplemental materials. We have 3 appendices in that packet. The first is the full assessment. So we talked about that earlier. The second one is the tips for the open-ended questions. And then the third one is a summary packet from Center for Substance Abuse Treatment that has kind of more information if you're interested about how to do focus groups and what the purpose of them is and how to gather that information in a positive way. So if people are interested, again, these are all reference materials. It's not something that you necessarily have to use, but we wanted to make sure you have access to it in case it's useful. So I'm going to turn it back over to Jeff for a bit to do some summing up and highlights from the overall training.
So, we need to remember what our role is, that we're there to help move people to meeting these requirements, meeting these standards. The standards, again, are all based on evidence. If you've read volume 1 or volume 2 or the family drug court standards, there is commentary that goes along with them that clearly explains what research was done and what the results were. There's probably not a document that I have used in my half century more than volume 1, volume 2, and the family drug court standards. I am constantly referring to them, using them, and find them to be very helpful. And you know, that's our role, to be helpful and try to get our courts to utilize the standards as much as possible. We talked about confidentiality. If you run across good ideas, you run across concerns that you have about a particular court or whatever, you know, let me know. We'll talk about them. We'll get it resolved. We'll take care of business. That's what we're here for. And you'll run across a lot of strengths, and you'll run across probably a fair number of problems. And again, prioritize them and what you think is most important for that particular court to take care of business and do the best they can that they can do. So what do you need to take with you? You know, there's a list of things. I'm thinking that from the standpoint of the green sheets, which are the packet of material that you'll want to take on site with you, that maybe what we'll do is get the state printer to print those off. I don't know how many pages there are, but probably the best thing to do would be for us to print them off and to send them to you so you don't have to. And each peer reviewer would have a set to take on site with them.
Now, will these be in a binder? And if so, what color?
I don't know the answer to that. But
I would like mine bedazzled, thank you.
We'll try and get you each a set. If there are other things that you think you need when you go on site and you can't provide them through your own budget or your own program, your own agency, let me know. I'll try and get those taken care of for you. I don't know what to say about appropriate clothing. I always try and wear a tie when I go into court out of respect for the judge and out of respect for the criminal justice system. That's what I do. You know, I think you, as a peer reviewer, should, you know, you'll use good judgment and you'll represent the court administrator's office well, and I don't know what else there is. I guess nothing else to say about that. Schedule a half day to complete the report. It doesn't have to be all at once. And drafts, I think it's fairly easy to send drafts back and forth at this point, you know, through the electronic media that we have available to us. The report gets written several ways. You just need to come to an agreement with your co-conspirator on how you want to do that. We try to get it done in 2 weeks. Quite frankly, in some cases, it's taken 30 days or more. And if it does, it does. As you indicate, you know, we're all volunteering our time above and beyond what we normally do. So it may take a little longer than 2 weeks. If you submit your draft to me, I will review all of them and submit them to the judge and the coordinator locally, give them a couple weeks to review them, and then we'll finalize them. We've not run into any problems with wording or that kind of thing in the past, and I don't anticipate that we'll have any problems in the future. Again, everybody wants to improve upon what they do and do the best they can, and I don't think we're going to have any problems there. So that pretty much, I think, sums up what Juliet and I were going to try and lay out for everybody. Final time to ask questions if you've got any, or express concerns or good things or whatever. Both Juliet and I, of course, will be totally available in the future. I will be going on reviews as well. So, questions? I don't want to sign off unless everybody's had a chance to make comments or ask questions. Juliet, anything else you want to say?
I don't. I just wanted to thank everybody for sticking with us for this 4 hours. We really appreciate it. We really appreciate all your feedback. It's important to hear people's concerns and be able to talk about them and to figure out what's the best way for us to accomplish what we want to accomplish and still make it feasible and doable for everyone. So I think it's important to talk about. Thank you. And thanks for being part of this process.
And I left a comment in the chat just thanking you all, and I'll contact you, Jeff, about my specific situation. And I just thank everyone for the training and the opportunity, because you opened my eyes to a lot of information that I wasn't privy to. And this was very valuable, and I thank you all very much.
Thank you, Dolores. Victoria, if you've got concerns, give me a call, write me a note. We'll talk about it and decide what you want to do at that point, or anybody else for that matter. All right. One last chance for questions or concerns or whatever. All right, thank you all very much. I know it was a lot of time and effort, and we appreciate it. And we'll move forward from here. You'll be hearing from us. Thank you all very much.